What's up, people? Oh my God, is it Special Prosecutor Jack Smith, the guy who's prosecuting Donald Trump? Hey, everybody. Dave, I appreciate it. Thank you. Smarty Bob, hello. Old Scotty, my man. Gary, Kelly. Jack Smith says, I wish, man. I wish too. I wish I could talk to Jack Smith. He's been having a rough couple of days. Econoboi and Staxioms will be joining us very soon. Katron Lonely, hello. I'm impressed by your content. Wow, you sure sound like a bot.
Hello. I don't know if I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, just faintly. Hold on.
It's on me. It's me.
Okay.
Yeah.
How's it, buddy?
I just asked you a question. I'm gonna ask it for the third time.
I apologize. I don't know.
What about now? Ooh.
I can hear you just great.
God,
you sound beautiful. You sound amazing.
I don't like you. I really don't. There's something
I'm
about
sorry.
you as a person.
Facts. Fair. I like you though. You're okay.
I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense why you like me. I'm a very charming person. I've been told occasionally.
Yeah, I just
It's
really
mostly
got that.
me telling myself that. So
Right, and me telling you that.
Not nearly enough.
True. I'll work on that.
Yeah, please do.
Valid.
I need affirmation. Dave here says, "You all right without your daily dose of Jessica Tarlov?" Dude, it's been tough. It's been real tough. I'm not gonna lie. It's been sad. Oh damn it! I clicked Scotty instead. Yeah, Jessica Tarlov. I don't know if you know who she is.
She's the Fox News.
She is. She's amazing, and she's been on maternity leave, selfishly wanting to nurture her child. I mean, just like
unbelievable.
That. Yeah, but
don't know anything about that.
She's very missed. Well.
Yeah. So as Josiah knows, but the audience doesn't, my wife is pregnant, and it's very exciting.
I am so happy. I can't wait to find out who the father is and congratulate him. What's up, Giant E?
Hello. Glad to hear Staxioms is producing another Biden supporter.
Facts.
Well, 100%. Remember, he was a Jill Stein supporter in 2016.
It's been 8 years. It's been 8 years.
Yeah, I hope it's a recessive gene. That's all I say.
Directionally, the generational political alignment, it's the realignment started with Staxioms and continuing downstream now.
Yeah, exactly.
I just don't know how the hell he talked his wife into it, to be honest with you. I mean, I would imagine after a prolonged experience with you, she might be thinking, I don't know if I want to carry this on into the next
legitimately
generation.
it's like sometimes I'm just like, why don't we bring her on? She's way more informed on these sorts of issues.
100%.
She's got a major, or she's got a master in masters in international development, works with like Latin American countries with like workers' rights and feminist issues, and I'm just here like the asshole I am.
I mean, she also has a profound sense of charity, obviously. So I mean, you know, yeah,
nice.
What about you, Giant E? What's up, man? How are you?
Nothing much. No big personal news. Staxioms, family pregnancy, and Josiah, you got engaged, I think, since the last time we spoke. I think that happened in between.
No. Listen, and I'm glad she's not listening to that right now. Okay, I want you to completely delete that. Okay, from the record. No, she and I moved in to an apartment.
What?
Which is
like the
Yeah.
heathens they are.
And
Am I
They're not even-
misremembering? I thought I saw this whole thing. I guess it was just we moved in together. I must be misremembering.
no. So like I'll do like random like social media updates because I like to show off how hot she is and how amazing my friends are.
Reasonable.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, perfectly weasel. But no, we're not married or engaged or anything like that.
Wow. Well, I
We
hope
actually-
I implanted the idea into her head.
You are not. You are not. You did not trigger the idea, but it would be. You were probably the first to like say it out loud publicly in front of an audience. So, but
There we go.
no, we haven't even been together for a whole year yet. It's amazing. Like it feels like it's been like 4 or 5 years, but not even a year.
Yeah. I
Well,
had
I
a friend
do-
who got
I do live
engaged
in-
recently, and it was one of those situations where we were like, Jesus fucking finally, dude. Because they were together for a while and we all gave him a bunch of shit about it. So it was it's a good roasting.
Well, we live in Mormon, Utah. So honestly, the fact that we were dating for like 6 months and
Mormon,
haven't
Utah.
proposed yet. Yeah.
Is there any other type of Utah?
Well, it's just like the most Mormon centric version because like I have 6 siblings and my wife has 7. And so like all of her siblings are married right now and they got married at like 18 years old after knowing the other person for like 6 months. Sometimes
They
less
waited
than
that long, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So like we moved in after like a year and a half. No. It was fewer than anyway.
I can't wait for you to
everyone
forget
got on our
your
ass.
first anniversary, your first wedding anniversary. Your recollection of this is really stunning.
Well, it is confusing because we had a fake wedding. It was actually a cute story. So here's what happened. I don't love all of our in-laws and all of our parents and stuff. And we're like, let's just fucking elope. Let's get rid of this. I don't want to deal with all of the obnoxiousness.
I
that
don't
comes with all
love
this.
our family, wife of mine. Can we just
She would
skip
back
that
it.
part?
She would 100% back
I'm just gonna put this VOD up. I'm gonna make sure it stays up at all times. This might
It's
be like-
fine.
yeah.
They only all follow me. So then we were like, let's just elope, but we didn't tell anyone. And then we're like, okay, once she gets pregnant, we're gonna have a wedding. And then at the wedding, we're gonna reveal that she was pregnant this whole time, and it'll be like a little gender reveal party, and it'll be like a gotcha. And it was great. And that happened like a week and a half ago. So we got everyone together to get to come in for a wedding and stuff. And it was just, hey, she's pregnant. Actually, we've been married for like 6 months now.
Wait a minute. So just to be clear, if I'd been able to make it like I originally planned to, you
Mhm.
just sprung the, haha, just kidding, she's pregnant. And I would have traveled 7,000 miles for no reason.
Yep. Yeah. I've got a buddy from New York who traveled for no reason, for a better reason than I think that babies are cooler to celebrate.
Nobody
than getting married.
travels.
That's what we're
just
trying
for-
to stop. It's like, hey, babies are cooler than we're already living together. Like, what is marriage really at the end of the day? A
Fair.
baby is a full fucking person.
You travel
is
for
now
a wedding though
existing.
for the free food. So did you?
I
feed
did have
people
free
for
food.
this?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes. I
well,
would have
then
given
that-
you free
then-
food for sure.
then
Yeah,
Josiah,
he
he's-
DoorDashed McDonald's for his guests.
It was the local like street taco place.
It's the
and it was
it's
awesome.
the local Golden Arch burger place. It's like known for the golden arches and the golden fries.
known for their sophisticated chicken nuggets.
So, well, speaking of sophisticated chicken, I don't know if the segue is going to work at all.
I'm
but we're gonna
excited.
Try it. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, folks, just tried to remove Republican Speaker Mike Johnson and failed spectacularly.
Who is the sophisticated chicken? Oh,
I
I
don't-
see. Oh, no. They were like playing chicken with. Is this where you're going with? Like they were
Can
playing
you? I
chicken
don't know.
the
Can
game?
you? First off, can you hear the echo?
No, I can't hear an echo.
Haha, did it right this time.
I'm proud of you.
Nailed it. Yeah. So no, I don't know. I don't know who the chicken is in this situation. But it was my best attempt at a segue.
Got
I mean,
Thomas Massey in the background.
yes. What a douchebag. This is a congressman from Kentucky. He like considers himself independent, kind of libertarian-esque, but I don't know. He's a total tool.
Quite a douchebag for.
You probably voted for him.
You have to be quite a douchebag to be in a screenshot with Marjorie Taylor Greene and still be labeled a douchebag.
That's true. Like she is. I don't know who's more insufferable between them. So let's play some of this, and we'll break it down.
Oh, I can't hear anything, unfortunately. So maybe you didn't do everything right.
Can't hear
Josiah
it?
thought he did it right, and he fucked
Damn
it up
it!
again.
What an
Ah,
idiot! Everyone
every
make fun of
freaking
Josiah now.
time.
What an
Okay.
idiot!
You can't
Oh
trust
my
a
goodness.
Democrat to run anything.
True.
No, you can't. Listen, this is
what
this-
Republicans are known for: technological
Shut
advancement.
I hate you so much.
Jesus.
Like,
What about now? Can you still hear an Can you hear an echo?
let's hear if there's an echo. No echo. You did that
Cool.
great.
Which would only happen
hear
if
it.
Republicans actually vote for Hakeem Jeffries.
Nice troll job by the congressional Democrat.
Yeah, they heckled her constantly throughout this thing. We're not going to watch the whole thing. I just wanted you to everybody get a little flavor, a little taste of the experience that she had.
And I don't know how.
I'm sorry.
Sometimes you got to inform the audience. Hakeem Jeffries is the minority leader currently. He's
He's the
Democratic.
leader.
Yeah.
Yep.
Speaker in waiting.
Indeed. I mean, they are favored. Democrats are favored to take the House, so it's not exactly inaccurate.
House will be in order. Gentlewoman will suspend.
High-ranking Democrats have publicly stated they will save Mike Johnson from a vote to vacate him. In a recent interview, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said, "Even though we're in the minority, we effectively have been governing as if we were in the majority."
Speaker, the House is not in order.
Speaker, the House is not in order, Speaker.
Yeah,
I love these people. I love the fact that these people will heckle literally anybody, but they can't stand to be heckled in turn. It's so funny to me.
It's kind of unbelievable how it's kind of unbelievable how this one member of the House can overthrow the speaker rule has really played to the Democrats' advantage. Because
for sure,
Hakeem Jeffries, he's not bullshitting when he says that I think the reason he's saying that is because historically it seems like the Democrats have a much greater ability to whip the votes of their own caucus than the Republicans. Like certainly,
100%.
yes, the squad exists and the DSA affiliated Democrats exist. However, they're very they're very electoralist in nature. They're not like the Twitter leftists who just want to vote against they're not the equivalent of the Tea Party of the left, basically.
Yeah.
Right. They're actually pretty able to understand compromise and work within the system and things like that. And I don't know if we had a Democratic majority, I don't know if you'd see these same problems.
No,
Yeah,
I mean, we saw it for 2 years and we didn't have the problems. Nancy Pelosi, her rule was never bring a vote to the floor if you didn't have the votes already whipped. And she never ran into this issue, whereas Republicans run into it on the daily. And it is interesting because what's funny is now like the thing is like Republicans are in disarray. That's what you hear, and it's true. But historically speaking, especially those of us who have a memory of Democrats pre-Trump, that was really usually the opposite. It was the Democrats who always had the circular firing squads and the dissent within their ranks, whereas Democrats or Republicans would fall in line. And now their position seems to have flipped in the age of Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Nancy Pelosi, I love it. It's so funny because we've even seen like Fox News commentators and Newsmax commentators give Pelosi her due, and they're like, listen, we despise her. We think she's the wicked witch of the West, but in terms of actually running shit, she's just objectively better than Johnson and McCarthy and whatever. And to me, that's the sales pitch, or part of the sales pitch that we have to make going into November, which is, again, even if you disagree with certain liberal or progressive policies, Democrats can actually run the country, and certainly far better than Republicans can. That's why I'm curious, like, what's your position? What do you think on, I mean, because she was right. Democrats did vote to table the motion. It wasn't just Democrats. It was 197 or 196 Republicans and 180 something Democrats. So it was close. They voted to table the motion, which effectively killed this attempt by Marjorie Taylor Greene. And it was expected because they released a public statement a few days ago, Hakeem Jeffries did, saying that he would, protect Johnson. What's your position on that? Did he do the right thing or did he not do the right thing?
It's hard to say. I think that it's all going to come down to how much you think the Democrats could have really extracted from essentially the Republican speaker. And I don't know if the answer is that they could have gotten that much. Like I think that um, there could there could have maybe been like an incredibly outside shot for maybe some additional social spending, but at the end of the day, you'd still have to inspire a handful of Republicans to vote for such a package, even if Mike Johnson allowed the vote. Um, look, I'm on the side of just let the chaos happen because it makes the Republicans look bad, and it'd have been hilarious to see. And it's like, hey, you've already gotten the funding for Ukraine passed. You probably don't need to pass another Ukraine bill for, I mean, presumably at least another year or two. I mean, it was a pretty decent sized chunk of weaponry and aid that we were giving. And then same thing for Israel. You know, no matter what side you fall on that, I mean, I don't know why we would need to pass another aid bill to Israel anytime soon. And so, yeah, fuck it. Just let them have another chaotic, you know, oh shit, who's going to be the speaker, guys? Like, you know, just let them do that again. That's kind of where I fall on it. I think it would have been hilarious. And it would just go to show that the Republicans have no ability to govern. I mean, remember, even when Trump was president, when they had a united government, we had the longest shutdown in history.
Yeah.
Under a Republican united government. That would never happen with Democrats in charge, but it happens when Republicans are in charge because they have, you know, this sort of identity crisis currently that's still going on, it turns out.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree with you, but I would say that
go ahead, simp for those institutions.
No, we shouldn't. No, we
partisanship.
should engage with optics quite a bit because there is the average American who sometimes looks at shit shows happening in the government and then just sort of blame
everybody,
the president, you know, or like, you know, like not the correct institution oftentimes. So I'm wondering how well that would play to our advantage, because I do know that the average American, like the median voter, is relatively bad at figuring out who specifically fucked up specific issues.
I think this situation is unique though, because I don't think we would need another funding bill until after the election. Sure. So there's no risk of a government shutdown or a debt crisis.
Actually, so wait a minute, sidebar, real quick. I'm almost certain that the 6-month government extension that Mike Johnson agreed to recently, I'm pretty sure it evaporates right before the election, which actually might even be better. In theory, I could see a timeline in which that actually works to the Democrats' advantage, because imagine, let me give you a hypothetical. We do exactly what you said, Econoboi, which is actually where my instinct is. Like, unless we get meaningful,
we just let them fuck it up.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, fuck it up like in a timely way. Like, do it publicly and epically right before they go to cast their ballots, so we can make the case like, hey, in a couple of weeks, you're going to cast your ballot. These motherfuckers can't run a lemonade stand, let alone the country. But I'm pretty sure, it evaporates right before the election. And then, imagine that they, you know, that they have their little civil war, the budget fights that we had before. And Democrats could, in theory, make the case, hey, listen, this is all because of them. I mean, historically speaking, Republican shutdowns are the few occasions where the median voter still tends to blame Republicans. It's like one of the few times consistently in political history where the citizens get it right.
Right.
But there is a risk.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like the one member being able to call a speaker election rule plays on both sides of the Republican spectrum, right? Where there are a lot of centrist Republicans that really hate government shutdowns. They don't want government shutdowns to happen. So even in the scenario where you flip the table up and just say, hey, Mike, you're on your own. Figure, you guys are all crazy. You guys figure out who's going to run the fucking circus for the next 6 months. And even if we come to a scenario where you've got like, Congressman Jordan or something as the speaker, who's a completely insane person, even if you're in that scenario, at the end of the day, a moderate Republican can trigger another speaker vote and get him replaced if he doesn't allow a vote for a budget on the floor, which I think there's a significantly large number of, Republicans and minority who would say the political calculus for us is we need to pass a budget. And even if that's just like 10 or 20 of us, that's all it takes to pass it in a world where, we're just going to elect, someone else to be speaker, and any of us have that power. So yeah, I lean towards they should have just probably let it blow up, and there's probably nothing else that they can realistically accomplish in the next 6 months anyway before the election. And, I think at the end of the day, like you said as well, this is a really internal, like clearly Republican problem. Like the Democrats cannot, I don't think reasonably the media or regular people are going to say, oh, if only the Democrats would vote for the Republicans. Like, no, they're Democrats. Of course, they're not going to vote for this Republican speaker.
Right.
You know, so.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know. I feel like now I'm thinking about it. Surely the average citizen wouldn't be so irrational as to say that Democrats are morally obligated to save Republicans. But I am imagining some punk ass Jill Stein voter from 2016 who really simps for institution. Oh, there he is. Yeah, there he is. Right there.
Me. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Democrats have to be the adults in the room. I could see. I don't know. When
Is
we
that a
began
Jill
our
Stein
friends-
voter? I feel like you're just looking at two aspects of me that you like to make fun of,
Listen,
and then just combining them.
It's because you triggered me, you traumatized and triggered me years ago about this, and I'll never forget it.
I apologized for it when I.
That's
when
part
I
of you
pulled
forever,
Josiah.
Staxioms. You have that within you always that you
Disdain.
might.
I
vote
legitimately
for agreement.
agree, and I'm like, this is something that I want to nip in the bud because I've seen people who get so frustrated with the institution that they feel like they just need to latch on to the first person who says, actually, both parties are bad. And like,
Yeah.
I get that, but I also understand how I got to where I'm at right now, which is actually that's really fucking stupid.
Yeah, it's funny. I've tried to, and I think we talked about this before, but as we get closer to the election, my posture on this is changing somewhat. So as a general principle, I have several general principles. I try not to punch left, even when people on Twitter get on my nerves. Stax, you and I've talked about this. We've had many phone calls where I've been frothing at the mouth, ranting about my people on my side of the aisle because I am disinclined to do it publicly. I just think that you got to. I think that if you spend as much time criticizing the left as you do the right, or more time, you're missing the plot. It's like, again, the metaphor I use is an ER surgeon who focuses on somebody's cholesterol instead of the piece of rebar sticking out of their chest. Like you've just missed the fucking point. So I refuse to do that. But I will, and also I've been sympathetic, and I still am sympathetic to the uncommitted movement. This idea that, listen, we will potentially vote for you, Mr. President, but because we are a cohort that you need, we also expect to be catered to from time to time. And this is a major area of policy where we expect a concession. That's perfectly reasonable. And then it's between them and Biden to kind of negotiate that out in the public forum. But what I don't like is, again, the false equivalence that I think Anna Kasparian does it. I think Nina Turner engages in it from time to time. I think like certain prominent voices, and it frustrates me. Like they're the two guys from the Vanguard who I really like. I like their show, Zach and Gavin. They're really smart guys, and we had this debate recently again too. And what I like about them is, even though they despise Biden, they're much harsher on him than I am, even in terms of domestic policy. They do recognize that Trump is just objectively worse. Like they make no bones about it. So they're kind of different from like the what I would consider like the accelerationist Twitter lefties. But then when like Nina Turner said what she did recently, it was so frustrating that tweet about, and I'll pull it up here, about how abortion rights collapse under the Democrats.
Right.
Which is just so
like, what the
disingenuous.
fuck are you like?
Look, I mean,
you could that's the easiest like A to B you could possibly draw.
Staxioms, look, we've already established the president's immune from any sort of criminal prosecution. So Biden should have just jailed the Supreme Court so that he couldn't have, he could have. Look, this is the same type of person.
He could have just logged Brett Kavanaugh and then just put his own fucking person in. It's that easy.
There are people who think that. There are people who seem to think that Biden has significantly more leeway than he does. Now, obviously, Biden can do more, but yeah, I mean, anybody who would, I don't even understand. I don't understand the goal of that type of rhetoric, even other than Nina just wanting to start a YouTube show where she can have a bunch of Patreon supporters. I don't understand what possible political goal you think is being accomplished by trying to say that it's actually the fault of the Democrats as to why we had these erosions of our institutions, our civil liberties. I mean, for God's sakes, like every single piece of evidence, when you look at like, how do Democrats govern when they are totally in charge? Look at Michigan, look at Arizona, like look at places where Democrats are totally in charge. Look at the first 2 years of the Biden term.
Yeah.
Democrats are totally in charge. they do progressive things, right? I mean, it's ridiculous to assume otherwise.
And there's like, I think my frustration too is like there are places where you can be critical of the Democratic Party that I'm really critical of the Democratic Party, but saying that Democrats aren't good on abortion rights or like labor rights, like it's like, what are we fucking talking
Right.
about?
Like
anymore?
if you wanted to say, hey, Democrats aren't socialists, they're not gonna,
Right.
socialize the economy. Hey, fair enough. Democrats are capitalists. I agree. But the idea that on social issues, like, dude,
Yeah.
Democrats are totally in favor of gay rights and trans rights, and I mean, look, the leftists in this country, the Democrats, we actually have a substantially more progressive social sort of left of center party than many other parties, even in places like Europe or Australia. I mean, you've got like Keir Starmer, who he has to like tread this weird line on Turf Island about trans people. Meanwhile, I'm not really aware of many Democratic politicians trying to take a similarly conservative stance, even on the issue of trans people, right? Or the issue of CRT. It seems like Democrats are generally speaking incredibly strong on social issues. If you wanted to criticize them on economic management, hey, fair enough, because they're not socialists like many people would want. But, on social issues, it's obviously, I mean, it's just completely ridiculous to criticize them. Or if you wanted to criticize them on foreign policy, like Israel and Palestine, obviously you might be out of lockstep with Democrats on that. But yeah, on social issues, that seems a little bit too much of a stretch.
For
Yeah,
sure.
so that's why I would just want to like go over this real quick. So she says when Roe fell, Democrats held the House, Senate, and White House.
What about the Supreme Court, Nina? What about the Supreme Court?
And what's funny is because I think we keep forgetting about this too. I do want to address the Supreme Court part of this because they are the final boss in the video game in democracy, right? They're the last boss here. So Democrats in the states have been doing well protecting reproductive rights, but federal Democrats must provide a path forward and build some trust because they did not codify Roe when they held power. Now, I didn't realize that was a thread, right? Because normally you put like a one or a thread emoji there. She says, before anyone can say they needed 60 votes, they only needed 50 votes to carve out the filibuster to get it done. So what's the plan? Where are the votes? Yes, the GOP is a threat to our rights. How do Democrats federally combat that? We need more than empty rhetoric. We need bold party leadership. We need Democrats to stand up and say as a party, no more big money in politics, no more buying politicians and Supreme Court justices, no more allowing right-wing mega donors to buy blue seats. That's the first step in the process to fix things. I actually disagree. I think the first step is elect more Democrats.
Right. And I would say that the big criticism that I have here now is that sometimes you have a specific perspective to look at politics and you like forget to take off those glasses sometimes. I agree that money in politics is bad. I don't know how money in politics is exacerbating the abortion issue in the United States. I think largely the abortion issue is because there are a considerable amount of Americans who are deeply pro-life, and anyone who would vote for a pro-choice policy would not get their vote. And that is at the heart of all of this. And like sometimes I think we forget how backwards so many Republicans and so many conservatives in America are. So like they're so not in step with us. Like look at the Respect for Marriage Act that happened like 2 years ago at this point, where like there was
by the way, let's put that in perspective. So the Respect for Marriage Act came after the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade, because Justice Clarence Thomas signaled in his concurring opinion
that he would go after it. He would go after
Obergefell. And then what was the one for contraception?
And then there was also the third one. This is when we need Pisco. The third one, which is also for interracial marriage.
No, he won't go after that one.
Oh, right.
That is the one that he's like, okay, I'll give that particular civil liberty a pass, the right to marry people of a different race. But it was gay marriage, which was Obergefell. It was
the court
contraception.
Griswold, Lawrence, and
Griswold.
Obergefell.
Yeah, and then so they did the Respect for Marriage Act as a way to preempt that, okay? And it had enough bipartisan support to get through. But when it came to abortion protections, the attempt to codify Roe, it passed the House because we had the margins to make it pass, and you don't have a filibuster threshold in the House. A simple majority will get a bill through the House. But then when it hit the Senate, you didn't have all 50 Democrats who were willing to break the filibuster to pass it. And
Mhm.
so that's kind of what I said. I'm like, I don't know what she's implying here, but as a reminder, when Roe fell, the House passed a bill codifying abortion rights. It died in the Senate because 50 Republicans voted in opposition and 2 conservative Democrats refused to break the filibuster. The answer is to elect more Democrats, hopefully progressive ones.
Yeah.
Don't let anyone suggest to you that the path to reproductive rights lay outside voting blue. They're the only game in town.
Yeah.
And then I said, also, as apparently a thread, the 2 conservative Democrats who refuse to break the filibuster to codify Roe won't be in Congress next year. Manchin or Sinema are seeking re-election.
To be the most fair, Manchin's seat will almost assuredly be taken by a Republican.
No, 100%. But that's why I'm saying they're not going to be there for better or worse. And on the issue of abortion rights, it's worse because they're or for better rather, they're not going to be there. But that also means we have to defend we have like 7 or 8 competitive Senate seats. So we have to John Tester in Montana, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, and a bunch of Texas is like the best chance we have to actually flip a seat, and they need to only win 2. We have to defend 8 to break even. They need to take 2 to win, and then it's game over. So I just am so frustrated by this because there is only one solution. You got to get Democrats. And by the way, Ruben Gallego, who's running to replace Sinema in Arizona, and he's leading over Kerry Lake, he has said he will break the filibuster if that's what's needed to codify Roe. And I think Colin Allred in Texas said he would as well. So that's what we need.
I think any Democrat, to be fair, going forward, especially because of the like partisan realignment with West Virginia now becoming like permanently 2 Republican senators, things like this. I would say that like it almost doesn't matter what your policy positions are. If you're a Democrat running for U.S. Senate and you say I support the filibuster, I just can't vote for you. I can't do it. Right? Like that would probably be a wedge point for me voting for Democrats because it has caused so many problems. It's such a bad part of our institutions. And so
it is. But let me ask you, would you be open to this? Because what's funny is I've been a bit bullish on the filibuster because my position is I actually don't want to get rid of it. I just would make carve outs. Because here's the thing, the filibuster, you can create a carve out anytime you want. You can change the rules. Now, obviously, every time you do, you dilute the power and incentivize the opposition party to do it as well. But we have used the filibuster to cockblock terrible Republican bills under Trump, under Bush. Yeah. And so because we have such an anti-majoritarian government, right, where Democrats are at a colossal disadvantage, I hesitate to get rid of that tool entirely. I just think that you should elect Democrats who, when it comes to voting rights, abortion rights, civil liberties issues, who would be willing to break it. And then if it slowly crumbles over time, so be it. But I would hesitate to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and certainly not when we're not at a position of colossal advantage.
But the problem is, no, I'm not, because I think that number one, I think that the Democrats in a situation where they've gotten rid of the filibuster, they only need one session of Congress to fix like almost all of those problems with our majoritarian system, right? You could get rid of gerrymandering, you could end money in politics, you could do all these things. And if Democrats in the scenario where they got rid of the filibuster chose not to do those things, again, that's a primary list for every Democrat that doesn't support those kind of things, right? I mean, if you're a Democrat who's genuinely saying, I support the filibuster so we can't pass a ban on gerrymandering, well, you're primaried. I don't care who you are. You got to get you out of there. And so that can already rebalance the system significantly. I mean, you could do other things, right? You could pass DC statehood, Puerto Rican statehood, stuff like that that can help as well. And the other thing is that I think that a lot of, the point that you made about Democrats could do all these carves out and stuff like that. I think that Republicans get away with pretending they'll do certain things that they actually will never do. So for instance, getting rid of abortion. They used that issue for decades to galvanize their base, but they never really genuinely made an attempt to get rid of abortion until Trump came along, and he was just crazy enough to put people on the Supreme Court who would do it. Like, we've had a conservative Supreme Court for a long time, right? But we've never had the types of margins and the type of ideologies on the Supreme Court to actually get rid of abortion. And look how terribly that's played with the American people since then. So look, we get rid of the filibuster, and we end up in a scenario in like 2028 or 2032 where we have a united Republican government, and they actually start to have the ability to pass things like, oh, just getting rid of welfare, or they're going to try to ban abortion nationwide. Good luck. Do that. Let's just see how that works out the very next election. I think they get one election to try some shit like that, and then all of a sudden we've got 60 Democrats in the Senate on an organic election, because the Republicans understand Their platform is truly not that popular. Even when they
Right.
had a united government, they tried two things.
Which is
They
the reason
lowered
why
taxes. I was going to say, when they had a united government, they had two things. They lowered taxes. They tried to get rid of Obamacare. Those are the only two things they really did. They didn't do any of this other crazy shit because I think deep down they know that's all rhetoric for the base. That's not actually something that would play well for a general audience.
Yeah, so the only thing though is, so I want to make sure I understand correctly. You believe that there'd be no risk in abolishing the filibuster because if you had the margins to abolish the filibuster, you would be able to do all of the things with that same Democratic Senate majority that would rebalance the system. I'm not sure. I need to ponder that. I need to ponder that because I'm not sure that that's the case, because you got to understand too that some of these things are beyond the scope of federal statute. So for example, we'd need to abolish the Electoral College. We would need to make radical reforms to gerrymandering. We might be able to do that with federal statute. You would also, I think maybe statehood is a process of federal statute, not constitutional. I think it is federal statute.
Yeah, I think you just pass a bill.
Yeah. So, but some of these things I think would require constitutional amendments because, like, no, the Supreme Court composition, that's a matter of federal statute post the Civil War. So, I mean, maybe, I don't know. To me, even if you think the risk is to me, it's smaller if we do it my way, which is keep it and just break it when you need to, as opposed to breaking it wholesale. I mean, I take your point. It's probably not as risky as I thought, but I'll think about that. I'll kick that around.
It's just that I think as well, the second point can't go underanalyzed as well, is that Americans are not nearly as radical as the Republicans in Congress, right? Whereas Democrats are just genuinely speaking a significantly, Republicans will cope on Twitter all they want. Democrats are not nearly as radical in terms of political alignment to like the average person than Republicans are. And so given that, I think that in a scenario where you've got, 2028 rolls around, I don't know, Ron DeSantis or whoever the fuck is like the Republican nominee, maybe Trump again if he loses again, and they somehow end up with a united government after that. I think a similar situation would play out, like almost played out in the UK, where Liz Truss was the prime minister for literally like 30 days, I think. And it was because when she got elected within the Conservative Party vote,
she proposed, Queen died on her watch. The Queen finally dipped.
It was all her fault.
Jesus.
But no, the point is, when she tried to take a page out of, what's her name? I'm blanking on her name, Margaret Thatcher's playbook. And she's like, oh yeah, we're going to lower taxes for the rich. We're going to get rid of we're going to increase these exemptions, and we're going to distribute a lot of money to the rich, and we're going to cut welfare. Literally, the conservatives, the Conservative Party of the UK, which has been at the most the second biggest party in the UK for like 100+ years.
And they've been in power for more than a decade.
Yeah. They immediately started polling at like 25%. And they were literally going to be the third largest party. And I think if Republicans, similarly, if they got into office and they really started to say, oh yeah, we're going to get rid of Social Security. We're going to cut the absolute shit out of welfare. We're going to get rid of public education. We're going to try and get rid of abortion. Okay, have fun saying that for the next 6 months because there's no way that any of that will pass. The moderates won't vote for it. And even if they have the balls to vote for it, that will be the last election you ever win. Because the Democrats will come in and they'll just undo it the next election cycle.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Stax.
Well,
no, that's all I had.
I hear what you're saying, but I'm wondering if, like, they did get rid of abortion, and the Republicans are still have that majoritarian advantage.
The issue is that they thought that they would be more politically insulated if the Supreme Court got rid of it, because number one, they were just getting rid of precedent. It wasn't a new precedent. They were just getting rid of an established precedent. And they could always say, well, that was the Supreme Court that did that. But the American people appear to overwhelmingly not buy that.
Right.
They appear to basically be saying, look, you are the dickheads who have nominated and confirmed those people to be on the court. You have to deal with the political consequences of getting rid of abortion. And so even on the abortion issue, I think that they, much less if they're actually passing these bills themselves, I think that the Republicans would immediately, there'd be a radical realignment if they actually ever got in and tried to do those things on a national level.
To me, I think you just, I guess I'm I'm surprised because you used to be pretty cynical about the 2024 election. I don't know if something's changed or not, but I'm too much of a cynic. I feel like, again, to get rid of a tool like the filibuster, which we've used to great success, I just feel like a bunch of things would have to happen simultaneously. It would have to be the political equivalent of the red wedding. You know what I mean? Just a decisive blow against the opposition in kind of an utter way. Because
I'm not saying we should do it if we lose. Don't get me wrong. If we lose in 24, I love the filibuster. Let's keep that bad boy around, okay? But
no, well, precisely. But because the other thing too, I'm thinking like just so much of what you're saying, I think, depends on the public to be informed and the public, I think, to have the right priorities. Because like even you take abortion, right? Okay, obviously, we talk about how Democrats won in 2022. And even I say that, but like we did, but we didn't, because we still lost control of the House. We won in that we didn't lose nearly as bad as we probably should have, given the political headwinds and the historic precedent. And even now, the election isn't right now. Times can change, but Trump is neck and neck with Biden, despite facing 88 criminal counts and just being an overall disastrous president. So like my default heuristic is that even when we have the substance, the facts, and the record on our side, I just think we're at just a general disadvantage.
Like, here's what I hope, Josiah. Can we
Because
all agree on this?
Because of how this system is set up, I think that in terms of the media landscape, in terms of the institutions, Republicans just enjoy a colossal advantage. And also, I think also when it comes to partisan motivations as well, because which is a bit of a mixed bag, because right now Biden obviously has dissent, or had dissent in the primary, but the media didn't really report on this particularly well. But so did Trump. In many ways, Trump's dissent from my God, Nikki Haley dropped out 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago, and it was at Wisconsin where she pulled about a quarter. It was Indiana where she pulled about a quarter of the primary vote. So I don't know. I just feel like I would hesitate to like.
Can we all agree that it would be the funniest thing that ever were to happen in American history if Biden lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College because he wins the Rust Belt? That'd be the funniest thing in American history.
Then Republicans would rush.
I would be so fucking smug. But also, what's funny is,
oh my God, guys, we live in a republic. It's not a democracy.
It's not a democracy, losers.
What are you gonna do?
Do you see anyone going over after the Super Bowl saying, "Hey, it wasn't fair that they won. You agreed to the rules, bitch."
Look, the states elect the president, not the people. So what are we gonna do? That would be hilarious. But the thing is, though, I don't actually know how unlikely that scenario is given the polling, right? Because it's true that Trump, because here's the thing, like Trump is polling pretty well in swing states. That's true. So like if you do that comparative analysis, he is. And he's also polling well nationally. But at the same time, Democrats have very consistently, even up to the most recent special elections and statewide elections, outperformed expectations. And so it really wouldn't shock me. It really, really wouldn't shock me if Republicans do extremely well, like they expand their margins in deep red states, but Biden's able to eke out a victory. Like he wins like Virginia, Nevada, and like Michigan and Wisconsin. And like those are the only states you need to basically win the whole election. He ends up getting like 270 electoral votes exactly, but he ends up losing the popular vote. That wouldn't be the most unbelievable scenario to me if it did happen. So it'd be interesting to see how that would shake out.
Yeah, well, listen, I'll say this, even if in such a scenario, I would just say for the record, I would still support the abolition of the Electoral College.
100%.
Absolutely.
100%.
It would just be funny in the moment.
Oh, no, I completely agree. It'd be hilarious, and I'd rub it in, but
it'll be one day of rubbing it in, and then we'll be like, all right, let's get rid of it.
I'd also use it like, hey, assholes, this is what we were talking about, so do you want to get rid of it now? And actually, what's funny is we've got Philip Bunn, aka Eucharist. He's probably going to be joining us here in a bit to talk about institutions, because he and I have it's been telephone trying to set this
Philip
up. We've been trying
Bunn.
to do this for months. Yeah, he's Eucharist.
What a name.
I think you guys, I am almost certain you all have interacted on Twitter before.
Sure.
But let's go to, because the chat was blowing up. Let's see some of what chat has to say.
They asked who we think the VP pick will be from Trump.
Oh, for
It's
Trump?
not Kristi Noem, not anymore. I thought it was going to be her.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
She's been
Cricket, the dog, has a better chance of being the VP at this point. So I don't know, man. I do think maybe Elise Stefanik. I mean, Noam is a for Trump's purposes a more optimal version of Christy Noam or of Elise Stefanik, but Elise Stefanik might be the one now. We're gonna bring Professor Bunn on here in just a second, but real quick, let's see here. With Staxioms in Utah, you think he wouldn't shut up about crazy conservatives?
The opposite is true.
Yeah.
I see so many fucking psychos. I'm like, I need everyone to know how crazy they are.
I don't know. Mormon Republicans are pretty. They're pretty unique, though.
They're like huge Mitt Romney fans, obviously. And it's hard. They've definitely split a little bit between
like they're the most environmentalist Republicans.
Yeah. For sure, because they love their the national parks, which are awesome.
We got to blitz through some of these. Hang on one second. So censor shills and leftist extremists sharing the same moronic narrative on Biden. Yeah, I'll die on the hill. People can say whatever they want. Oh, the media's in the pocket of Democrats. Like, wrong. Just flat out fucking wrong, especially with that news that broke about the New York Times recently about they have a grudge against Biden because he won't give them an interview. No, the liberal media will gleefully throw Democrats under the bus for the sake of clicks.
Well, Biden has a grudge against them.
As well he should. Good.
Yeah.
Fuck them. Yeah.
They didn't.
The media has a money bias. It has a profit bias. It doesn't have a left-wing bias.
This person's the person that I was thinking of the most in terms of responding. David Lelai. I don't know. He's talking about Nina Turner, saying Nina Turner is right. I was gonna try to
She's technically correct in that, yes, Biden was in power when Roe v. Wade was overturned. So yes, she is right. Yeah, she's right.
Well, we'll
just leave it at that.
Provide some more context.
We're gonna leave it at that.
Josiah is forgetting that Sinema ran as a progressive. What's the guarantee that more Democrats won't vote in opposition of the filibuster? There is no guarantee.
But
this is actually
all right. Go for it.
There's how can you guarantee anything?
True, but David, what I would say is the best way to ensure that Sinema can't flip to the other side is by ensuring that Democrats have more of a majority so that more of them need to, if that makes sense. We only needed basically one or two Democrats to flip for the entire fucking process to fall apart. If we have 10 Democrats in the majority, then we need 10 of them. That is an insanely unlucky situation. And also, I do think Kristen Sinema is kind of the exception that proves the rule. She was so antithetical to everything she stood for. With Manchin, we knew 100% that he wasn't going to vote, that he wasn't going to be on the side of
wolf in sheep's clothing. There's no doubt about it. So I just we'll end this and then we'll bring Professor Bunn, aka Honey Buns, aka Eucharist on. She's objectively right. It is a fact that Roe fell under a Democratic administration, Senate and House. You guys are wrong. Again, I'm not saying she's wrong. No one said she was wrong, but the implication was that it was because of Democrats that this happened and that electing more Democrats won't get the job done. That's wrong. There's no guarantee. It's entirely possible that whomever you elect is a closet Republican, but that's a risk we have to play.
Obviously, the correct statement is that this was overturned by the Supreme Court, which was large. There were 3 specific justices that were nominated by Trump. One of them was essentially stolen from Obama. So it's really easy to say that, no, it was 100% Trump that overturned the, sorry, hi, Philip. How's it going?
Oh,
hey, buddy.
I didn't realize I got pulled in.
You were. We've been staring at you and that lovely V-neck and that lovely stash for about 5 minutes.
A lot of books in the background. This guy's intimidating.
I do like owning books just to feel smart.
Oh yeah, it's great.
And I'll read maybe 40% of them.
I was about to say,
I'm not saying you do that. I'm saying I do that.
No. So that's the thing. The professor actually reads those books. Okay. Whereas you, on the other hand, you just like stare at them.
For sure.
Okay.
How do you read? Do you not stare at them?
I actually open and digest the words. You stare at the covers.
I missed that.
Yeah.
Exactly. I put them under my pillow and learn by osmosis. Okay.
Facts.
All right. There you go. All right. So, Professor, this is long overdue. Let's chit chat here. So, for context, so he's you teach political theory, right? It's not just
Yeah, mostly
Yeah.
political theory. Although I'm moving into a role where I'll be teaching more traditional like American politics classes here soon. So
Gotcha. Okay. So we had this conversation or potential disagreements. It'd be interesting to see where we are at this point. After I read a book called "Tyranny of the Minority" by two political scientists. There you go, right there, by two political scientists from Harvard. I think it's Zyblatt and Levitsky. I don't have it in front of me. And basically, they make the case that hey, for everyone who bitches about a tyranny of the majority, shut the fuck up because there's a tyranny of the minority, which is probably worse. And it seems like our institutions have been kind of beefed up to facilitate that. And it's accommodating a rapidly shrinking and increasingly authoritarian minority to impose its will on the rest of us. And they make recommendations about what to do about it. Expanding the Supreme Court, abolishing the Electoral College, passing federal voting rights, making voting, a constitutional right as opposed to a constitutional privilege, et cetera, and so forth. So that's the context for all this. Professor, what did you think of the book, and will you endorse it? Like the next time they reissue it, will it say Professor Philip Bunn on the back, greatest book in history?
I mean, I've probably recommended it a lot more than a lot of other books that I've read recently, because for the people that I run into who have these intuitions that there are like parts of the system that they consider to be undemocratic or anti-democratic, and that's a thing that bothers them, I say, well, yeah, if you want kind of like the most, as far as I've seen, the most sort of articulate version of this, and the most like articulate and define proposals for how to go about fixing it, these guys do a really good job of that. I don't always agree with their proposals. I think one thing that we can hash this out, but one thing that I find very sticky is that a lot of their proposals are sort of downstream of their last proposal, which is their biggest one, which is they want to lower the threshold for amending the Constitution. That's to me, they're the biggest thing that they want, because a lot of these other things to me is like, well, if that's a proposal that you want and you can push for it politically and you get momentum on your side and we can pass a law that says this is what we're doing now, well, great, that's working within the system. But the thing that's fundamentally changing the system, as I see it, is not only do we want certain constitutional amendments, which would go through the normal process, but we eventually want to change the Constitution to where it's far easier to change the Constitution going forward. And that's the part that potentially terrifies me if I'm worst casing it. Yeah.
Okay, so to put it in perspective here, again, as a reminder, to amend the Constitution of the United States, you need a supermajority in both chambers of Congress, and you need 3/4 of the states to ratify it. Okay. Now, to also put this in perspective, not to load it too heavily in my favor, it is literally the hardest Constitution to amend in the world by far, right? Because not only do you impose supermajority requirements in a bicameral legislature, you also add 3/4 of the states. And there have been 12,000, 12,000 attempts to amend the United States Constitution, and we have 27 amendments. Like there is deliberate, there is making things deliberative, and then there's making things a Sisyphean task. Mm-hmm. And especially when our system is predicated on good faith, which I would argue is in its nadir at this point, it's basically asymptotically impossible to amend the Constitution of the United States. So the other thing I'll just say, and anybody else can weigh in, the professor, anybody, is other, again, advanced democracies around the planet don't require these many fucking hoops to go through, and they seem to get along just fine. Now, I also want to say I am not proposing a simple majority. I do think certain things should be outside the purview of a simple majority. Like, again, even constitutional amendments, impeachments, things like that. You should need a super majority to impose that. But we don't need to add, a moat filled with alligators and, Gatling guns and everything. Like, come on, man, let's make it a bit more reasonable. So does anyone else want to weigh in on that before? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I've always found it. I don't know. I've had that we've had this conversation with together and with other political commentators like Destiny and people like that, and I just feel like you'd have to experimentally. It just seems like there's so many different models of democracy out there and historical models of democracy, and it seems like we've really run the experiment on like pretty majoritarian, proportionally representative systems. And it seems like they work out pretty well in terms of establishing civil liberties and generally respecting, human rights. And it seems like, the more sort of horizontal democracy there is, it seems like the correlation is that you get more human rights, not less. And so, yeah, I'd be interested to hear the counter perspective. That's just kind of how I feel about it. That's why I've never really been particularly scared of the idea. I mean, like, the idea of abolishing the Senate scares so many people, but it's like, I don't know, a bunch of places seem to get along just fine without having a Senate. And, or even if we, made the Senate more democratic in nature, I don't know if that would be the worst thing in the world. It's not going to happen, but just thinking about it, doesn't seem like the scariest thing to me. So
I'll also say before Stax jumps in, Professor, you should be in high spirits right now, okay? Because Stax loves
The
to make
biggest
things harder.
institutionalist.
Yes, he does. As a matter of
Yeah.
fact, listen, he thinks that politics isn't hard enough for Democrats. That's why he voted for Jill Stein in 2016. He's like, I need really to get my blood pumping. Hillary Clinton has too much of an advantage against Donald Trump. Let's throw like a wrench in there. As a matter of fact, why a 60 vote threshold to establish quorum in the Senate? Why not like 90 out of 100?
Let's make them go through a decathlon just to make sure that they're like physically adept.
God. So
I don't have a perspective on this necessarily right now, but I'm definitely I'm the centrist here that Josiah hates. And I want to hear the counter argument because I hear where Josiah is coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say to what Econoboi was saying, that I would agree. Yeah, there are functional democracies elsewhere, but I would also say that something working in one place we've seen historically doesn't mean that it will necessarily work in other places. I do think it's true that there are people and situations that are suited to different systems of government, and so the fact that it functions well somewhere else, I don't know that it means it could be ported and would not have some sort of unforeseen or foreseeable consequences. The argument, as I see it, for like a higher threshold is that, well, the Constitution is the thing that makes the government. It's the sort of animating principle of it, and it's the thing that, at least in the theoretical sense, we all signed on to in some way to be a part of a common political community. And that the idea is that to change that is a pretty hefty thing. It's like changing the rules of the game in the middle of the game, right? It's not just that like we're making small tweaks. It's not just that the rules allow us to do this. It's that we're literally going to go back and revise the rules. And the circumstances under which you are allowed to revise the rules of the game that you're currently playing are maybe the most important thing that you can decide up front, right? I mean, everybody has played like really terrible games of Monopoly, and if we could just have majority rules voting on the active rules as the game goes on, things would be probably worse, I think, than your average game of Monopoly. So the idea that you should have some sort of very, very high bar before you can alter those rules that everybody is playing by makes intuitive sense to me, and it's so intuitive that I think most people in the history of at least Republican thought have suggested that leads you to a principle of unanimity, that you have to have unanimous consent to amend it, which is the intuition that we had under the articles, and it's the intuition that people like James Buchanan, the political economist, not the other James Buchanan, have when he does work on public choice theory and institutionalism and constitutionalism. That like, well, yeah, in order to preserve legitimacy and in order for everybody to be playing by actual fair rules, you actually have to all agree to amend those rules. I think obviously, like for reasons that the Federalist Papers state, you guys were talking about the filibuster, the same paper that's often cited against things like the filibuster or supermajority decision making. It says like, governments like Poland that allow one person to roadblock everything or require unanimous consent for anything to move forward, that's obviously non-functional. So we decided to do kind of the next best thing, which is, yes, you're right, it is a Sisyphean task to amend it, and I think that's probably a good thing. I would prefer it to 10,000 of those 12,000 proposed amendments being adopted, every other day. Yeah.
I suppose I take your point that, again, you don't want it to be an issue of simple majority, although as average debate enjoyer points out, state constitutions, there are at least some state constitutions which you can amend with a simple majority, and through public referendum, I think too, with a simple majority as well. So I just think even if we leave it outside the purview of a simple majority, we don't have to make it, again, a supermajority, and then an even bigger supermajority from 50 states. I think that, again, to use the metaphor of the gauntlet that is thrown in front of anybody to try to amend the Constitution, if you're already, going through a mountain trail and, there's a moat with alligators and you can probably like ditch, I don't know, the monkey bars across it. Like maybe we just walk across. I don't know. I feel like we could ditch the 3/4 of the states to ratify requirement. We're talking about, by the way, let's be very real here. We are talking about, yes, what is a total pipe dream? As a matter of fact, at this point, I'm not sure when we'll see another constitutional amendment again. It could be a generation. It could be another generation before we see one again. Currently at the rate of polarization in this country. But in theory, I don't know why. I mean, you think about it. You think about like what it takes to remove, like to successfully impeach and convict a federal officer. It takes just a simple majority to impeach, and then a supermajority to convict. And again, that makes sense, right? Because you don't want literally everything to be at the whims of a tempestuous majority. And to remove somebody who's been elected or appointed to a position, it should take more than just 50% plus one. But I'm just not seeing the logic of making it as difficult as we've made it. And perhaps it made sense at the time, but also I think it's fair to say there was a greater expectation of good faith, even in bitter partisanship at the time of the founding, compared to what we're seeing now. The last thing I'll say, and of course I say this as a progressive, is the other reason why it triggers me so much is it's already giving the conservatives inherently another advantage, which is, hey, to make change, you not just need a majority, you need a supermajority, and a 3/4 majority. It's like, do we get an advantage anywhere? Like what? Like this is like, not to be super reductive here, but what are you going to give us progressives? Where can we kick your asses consistently instead of you all always having the advantage in terms of our institutions?
I mean, I would say, in the sense that I think little c conservatism should always win out in institutions. Like, you should always have some sort of deference to the way things are and have a good reason to change it. I would say good, it's actually a good thing that there's a privilege in that direction. Like, so you use the example of impeachment, right? If we're not just talking about like removing one person from office, but we're talking about changing the rules going forward for how people are ever removed from office going forward. That's a big deal, right? To fundamentally alter that thing that we're all playing by. And so I think it should be a much higher bar than these other things that we're talking about, than passing legislation, than impeaching, than even convicting in an impeachment trial, that sort of thing. It should be much higher. So I would wonder, I guess, like what you think the ideal situation is. So I mean, as we've been talking about, there's you complain about this a lot, and conservatives also complain about this. It's really fun to watch both sides say the same thing about the other, which is the other side is the one who actually knows how to use power when they got it, brag about their accomplishments. We're not taking our victories and not using the mechanisms available to us. But there's always a fear, of course, that once you use a certain tool or tactic, that it's going to be turned back around on you. Now, as you would say, and I think the authors of Tyranny of the Minority would say, that's a pretty actual historically one-sided equation, right? When these norms get broken, it's typically the Republican side that is abusing that going forward, things like appointment hearings and whatnot. But I guess I just think of like all of the potential bads of the back and forth of power as we have it now, and say, well, that side did it when they were in power, and so now we're going to do it now that we're in power, and now dial that up to now it's easier to just change the Constitution, not just pass a new law, not just block an appointment, not just get more judges on the bench than would have been fair if we had just done things the way we've been doing it for so long, but to actually change the rules by which all of those things happen. Like, that's a terrifying thing to me, to make that easier, especially with the sort of fraught times that we're talking about. Yeah.
Well, it's just like, do you believe in democracy though, fundamentally, right? I mean, because it just seems like when you have more horizontal distribution of power, more like pure majoritarianism, which we see in so many different European sort of countries and places like that, it doesn't seem like we see a correlation between an ease of passing a bill with a majority and a lack of civil liberties. Like, it seems like when these conservatives get in power in these countries, they're pretty constrained by the general thought of people, which seems to line up intuitively with, well, we don't like it when the government, puts us all in prison for political thought. We don't like it when the government, has the military run things. We don't like it when the government, bans all the things that we might think would be an ordinary, sort of civil liberty, like interracial relationships or gay marriage, or, we don't like it when government imposes a religion on us. So I don't know. I understand generally having the fear of government, sort of tyranny and things like that. But I don't really see the empirics of majoritarianism and like ease of institutional amendment into a lack of civil liberties in the future, right?
Well, it sort of sounds like we all agree, though, that there are certain things that shouldn't be necessarily within the purview of simple majoritarianism, right? That there's all sorts of things that it seems like, oh yeah, we probably want some higher threshold for that, right? So I would say, yeah, we can have confidence within a system that we want, the people generally to prevail. I think that's the system that the Constitution was trying to adopt. It was like, okay, we want some system where the voice of the people is generally prevailing, but also we have these things that set up higher thresholds, so it's not everything literally 51% of people say yes, we should do this, so we do it. Yeah.
Right. I do agree with you here that we don't necessarily like democracy is not necessarily a value in of itself. That there's a lot of like necessarily getting more democracy doesn't mean better outcomes. There's a reason we don't have a direct democracy. There's a reason we don't vote on like the Federal Reserve rates. There's a reason I can go down the line. But I guess my question for you is, you said the reason that you don't want to look at other countries is because it doesn't necessarily port over to America. And the way that I typically look at political silence, and you can correct this if you feel like this isn't the right lens to look at it, but we're not really afforded a lot of experiments when it comes to how to run a country. We generally just have to go off of how other countries do. And I do agree that you can't necessarily just look at them and then port it over. Like there's a reason why we can't just use Australia's gun laws where in a country where guns outnumber the amount of people in the country. But I guess I'm curious why you feel like this couldn't port over, because I usually would need that sort of reasoning to say it wouldn't, if that makes sense. Otherwise, I would latch onto those policies. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to say like we don't look at other countries, right? I'm just saying like the fact that other systems exist that seem to function fairly well and have for a period of time doesn't to me say, well, that means we should fundamentally alter ours, because I just don't think that all governments should look the same. I'm perfectly fine with different systems of government existing under different principles, and we have a sort of a global system of experimentation. But I would say, oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask you. What's interesting is, so it's funny you say that. Because one of the strongest points, and I can't remember if they make this point in the book, but like when it comes to let me just briefly shift from constitutional amendments to, let's say, other institutional changes, like abolishing the Electoral College and directing, electing the head of state or the chief executive via direct popular suffrage, or Supreme Court reforms. Are you open to those things?
I'll say two kind of things, and I do want to see if I can go back.
Well, here's the reason I asked. Let me just skip to this. That way we don't go down the tangent completely. Does it say something to you? Like, let's not even compare it to 50 or to other countries. What about the 50 states? Mm-hmm. Like, to me, states were conceived. We hear that kind of trite phrase, laboratories of democracy, under our federalist system, and the Constitution imposes a Republican government. We told the states, like, listen, you get a lot of latitude, but you will have a Republican form of government, which is why all 50 states have 3 branches. It's a microcosm of the federal government. No state elects their governor via a little statewide electoral college. There's no state which has lifetime appointments for their high courts. They're either elected, they have mandatory retirement ages, they have term limits, et cetera, and so forth. So to me, it's like, I understand there might not be a perfect apples to apples comparison, but does it not give you pause? Like, I know you said you get worried about the notion of making changes to our institutions. Does it not also give you pause that on so many things we are alone? Like, hey, who else here has an electoral college? Oh shit, nobody else? Okay, does any of our 50 states, which are made in our image, do you all like get like 7 people to elect your governors? Oh, you don't? It's actually just, we just do it based on, oh shit. Like, I know you and we're friends, so I'm going to use the phrase, and I hope you don't like take it the wrong way, but does it ever humble you to think, damn, some of these ideas, we are literally at the federal level, the last man standing. Perhaps there should be change.
Yeah. Couple of things there. So I am open, obviously, to change of institutions, though I am a kind of conservative. Burke says that a government without the means of some change is without the means of its own preservation. So obviously things have to change, and I am open to change for good reasons through the sort of processes we've been discussing. So, I mean, you mentioned like the different structures of state governments, and it is interesting, looking at the colonial period and leading up to the Constitution, that there were states that had a much greater diversity in these sorts of things. They did have different methods for choosing their governors. Some of them were quite goofy, and I don't fully understand them. We did have states like Pennsylvania that were unicameral, right? These things changed over time as we did sort of smooth things out and figure out that some of it worked and some of it didn't for reasons that were outlined by people like Adams in advance, that like, well, no, the Pennsylvania Constitution's stupid and needs to change, and he was right. So I am comfortable with things like changing the Electoral College. Partially, so in the chat, somebody asked about how much stock we should put in the writings of the Founding Fathers. I don't know, like, again, this is a time it would be good to have Pisco around. I don't care too much in these conversations about originalism as like a dogma. I think it's important to understand why things were created the way that they were, the whole Chesterton's Finch cliche, whatever, so that we can better understand how we're proposing to adapt or change them. And so for the electoral college, for instance, it never actually worked the way that it was proposed to work. If you go read Federalist 68 about what Hamilton says about like what the electoral college was supposed to do and look like, it never did that. Like the idea was like, oh yeah, each state will choose these wise people who will come together in conference and decide on, this will ensure that they're choosing the best person out of all of the possible options. That just never actually happened. We pretty fast moved to what we have now, which is just like, yeah, the state says, hey, electors, you're going to go vote for this guy. You don't deliberate. This is not so yeah, I'm perfectly comfortable with the idea of changing that. I am not as quick to jump to, well, that means we need a national popular vote, because I think there were good reasons that we thought this is an operation of the states, not necessarily the people directly. But so things like abolishing the Electoral College, coming up with some other system, fine with that. Things like reform of the courts, that becomes slightly more difficult when we're stretching the bounds of the Constitution. But, obviously we've had different numbers of justices at various points. And so that's not fixed. That's something that we can
The founders
do.
themselves, like that's kind of that's one of the best silver bullets, in my opinion, against the notion that the Supreme Court is this unchanging body.
Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, they were founders, and they modified the composition of the Supreme Court. So like, yeah, there's precedent for it.
I would just be
so at
wary
least
of what happened the last time we tried to pack the courts, right? This was not a very popular proposal, and I think latching onto it too hard might not be...
You talking about President Roosevelt?
Yeah, it's not necessarily in y'all's best political interest, I don't think, but maybe it is long game. I don't know. Maybe you guys can convince me.
So I don't want to hog the conversation here. Econoboi, Stax, what do you think?
Well, I'm not sure how popular it would be to pack the court and do all these things. Obviously, it's just yeah, I guess just generally, I really don't think there's a lot of, I do not think that there's a lot of evidence. I mean, for instance, something that my co-host on Three Wonks likes to point out when he's arguing with other like anti-electoralist socialists who are more like revolutionary in nature is there has never been a revolution in a wealthy liberal democracy. It has literally never happened, right? And so similarly, you could also say that, well, when we think about like the most extreme sort of overreaches of government tyranny, we just don't seem to see that in, wealthy liberal democracies, right? And so it's not as if I think that Democrats are bullshitting, however, when they say, well, Trump is a serious threat to democracy. Trump is a threat to American democracy because we have all of these incredibly minoritarian institutions, right? That's why a guy like Trump can even get elected in the first place. If we had a, first past the post system or simple majority system for electing president, Trump would have never been president. Right. And a lot of these people would have never been in office in the first place. And I think that generally, when you see more majoritarian, much more horizontally accountable systems, much more proportional systems, I think you tend to see a moderation in politics. You just don't tend to see people who are so radical getting elected to these positions, at least not oftentimes not like incredibly right wing radicals. The most that, an example that you can have in that regard might be maybe like Boris Johnson in the UK, but Boris Johnson is not exactly what I would call like a Tea Party Republican equivalent. Like he's really, when you look at his positions, quite a moderate conservative on an American political spectrum. So I don't know. I don't really find, when I look for it, I don't really find the evidence that there's significant risk for sort of like right-wing government tyranny in an American context if we were to implement a more majoritarian sort of system of governments, whether that be what Josiah is talking about, where it's easier to amend the Constitution, like marginally easier, like he's talking about, or if we implemented like national referenda systems, or we made a, DC and Puerto Rico state. Like if we did these things, Typically the counter response is like, well, what if these right wingers get in office in this scenario where you've gotten rid of the filibuster and it's so much easier to do all these things? It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, I number one, I don't think that would even happen. But if it did happen, I mean, we live in a democracy. I mean, if people vote for that kind of platform, what are you going to do, right? I mean, that's what they want to be enacted. So,
Go ahead.
Well, so go ahead. I don't want to dominate either. So go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how convincing I find this argument. Like, I feel like to be the only country with this specific system, you probably need a fairly decent reason. I do think that the default should be to notice that every other country has had it without a hitch, if that makes sense. And if I see a good reason as to why America should be the exception, I'm more than willing to implement this, or to continue along with the way that our rules are set up. But I don't know if I've heard a specific reason as to why America would be exempt from the positives that are existing in other countries.
Oh, so on the issue of how we select our executive, I again, my deference is to the way we've been doing it, even though the way that we've been doing it has not been how it was intended to work. This is why I don't buy the originalist argument always. I don't really care what it's intended for. It's just the fact that we've been doing it this way for XYZ years. And so I think what I'm concerned about is not like some hypothetical, I guess, like spiraling, populist ticking time bomb. It's specifically with election of the executive. It's that I don't think people realize fully enough that despite what everybody else does, this would be a fundamental shift in the way that we understand the appointment of the executive. It has always been, so far in the U.S., an appointment by the states and not directly by the people, because we have what Publius calls a mix of a federal and a national system. We have parts of the government that are directly reflective of the will of the people as individuals. We have parts of the government that are reflective of the will of the states, and this was by design. And one of these things is the appointment of the executive as a representative of that. And so, like, maybe that's something we want to do. Maybe there are good reasons for it, but I just want people to sort of grapple, I guess, with that it is a pretty big shift from how we have been doing it. I would say the American situation, or the American structure, at least, is unique in many ways. Like, there aren't many other federated republics that look like us that have had the sort of like tiered system that we have, with the level of sovereignty that our individual states have had, with the sort of methods of appointment of all these different officials that we've had. And I would just want like some really, really compelling reason to change it, other than just the democratic intuition, which I understand. I understand why people, this doesn't feel right. He didn't get most votes, so why is he president? I get that. But it is just a shift that we need to acknowledge and have a good reason for you.
Well, obviously, I mean, this was long before you were born, but I'm curious. I mean, looking at like the 17th Amendment, right, which from, where we ceased to, we started to elect our state senators, excuse me, our senators via, direct popular suffrage. Wasn't the rationale there effectively just, again, that inclination towards expanding democratization of the country? Like, did you find that insufficient? Like, in hindsight, looking back at it, should the 17th Amendment not have been passed? Because my understanding is that was the fundamental reason why we began to elect senators that way. So do you disagree with that? Was that insufficient? Was it sufficient for the Senate, but not necessarily the president? I'm just curious where, because here's how I look at it. Like, Philip, just in general, I'll just level with you. I see you as like a good kind of like a brake check. Like, hey guys, just don't go too fast. But my instinct is that we still need to accelerate. Like, hey, I get you testing the brakes, but we're not going to park. I refuse to stay parked. We are going to go forward. So that's where I'm kind of curious, like testing. And I understand that there's no like perfect demarked line. There isn't for my philosophy either. But just to use the 17th Amendment as a kind of reference point, should that have not happened? Or if that could happen, why not the president?
So I think there were good reasons to maintain the state legislature's appointment of senators if you wanted the structure of the federal government to be the way the founders intended it. But that changed for the reasons you're describing. Like, it was just generally felt that, well, okay, these should just represent the will of the people within the states, not the will of the legislatures that has been filtered, And so I think you're right. Like, a similar impulse would probably drive us to these reforms, and I would want to see it go through the same sort of process. So yeah, I mean, like, it was an amendment to the Constitution, and whether or not I like the original form of appointment of senators, it's what we have now, and I think that's driven us more towards a sort of national flattened democratic view that's different from how it was prior. So I think a lot of things change, post Civil War, like the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments change lots of things about the government. We get incorporation as a doctrine after that, and then the 17th Amendment changes things pretty radically. So I think we have seen some pretty major changes in our Constitution, and if that's the direction that we want to keep going, great. Amend the thing.
So to clarify, then, is it fair to say you actually don't have any sort of value opposition to these proposals, because it sounds like you're indifferent on the 17th Amendment? It's just the reason that you approve of that is that it passed the amendment process. So as long as, so basically you either support or will not oppose expanding the United States into a more robust multiracial democracy, just so long as it goes through the amendment hurdle as it stands today, 2/3 on both chambers and 3/4 of the states.
So you smuggled multiracial democracy in there, so I look like a real asshole if I say no to this question. I did do that. I think you've backed me into a corner here. Which I mean, that's the phrase that the authors use, right? Which is fair.
Right.
I guess I would say there's levels to
no,
this, right?
wait a minute. It doesn't make you look like an asshole. It's just going to actually clarify. I don't think it does, because you could say, yes, I do want a multiracial democracy or a more robust multiracial democracy. I just want it to be actualized based on the current rules. I want Democrats to win the game because Republicans suck. I just want them to win by the current rules as they are. Then that's a separate issue for me. Then we can get into that. But I'm just curious if, like, just on the merits, you oppose these reforms, which would make our democratic republic more democratic.
On the merits, I might have quibbles, I suppose. But this is something that I'm trying to think of how to phrase this without just looking like a cagey jerk. Like, so there's the institutional level of this, which is like, I want this, if this is to change, I want it to go through this process rather than starting from what I think Ziblatt and Levitsky think is probably prior necessary, which is lowering these thresholds and kind of changing the amendment process. So I wanted to just kind of go through the institutional process. And then I think if it was working through that process, we could have some arguments about how we appoint the executive and whether or not he should be a representative of the people popularly. I think, the intuition that people have that this makes the president beholden to these small pockets of large pockets of population centers in states far from the interests of everybody else are the reasons why we wanted it to represent the states, not the people. But I think there's also good pushback against that. And so it's something I would have to hash out if that was a real policy on the table, which it isn't right now.
Yeah, because the thing that I look at it is the president's supposed to represent the people, not acreage. Right now, red rural states have an advantage collectively in terms of acres, but not in terms of population. Like, if I had to choose, do I want a president that represents this plot of land more or people? People win every time. There is under no circumstances would I ever give a solitary single fuck about acres. And so to me, that's where, and I think Levitsky and Ziblatt make this case pretty well. It's like, they don't get quite so blunt, but it's like, what is our preference here? What are we giving deference to in terms of representation? Because, like, conservatives will share this map, like even conservative commentators, like, the red map, right? Right. And it's like, okay, but then if you do the population map, you guys have like 2 red bubbles, fuck off, but it's also, I think it's fair to say, in my opinion, and it goes back to actually before you joined here, Stax had the hypothetical of what happens if, in Econoboi, they went back and forth on this, which was what happens if you have a Democratic president lose the popular vote and win via the Electoral College. The second that happens, Republicans want to abolish the Electoral College.
And maybe that's the political momentum you need. Hey,
well, because it's not about the institution. It's purely about outcome, specific outcome.
Yeah, I think that's true for political actors on both sides, certainly.
I mean, sure, to some, but also I don't know if I agree with that. So, like, for example, the last time Econoboi, Stax, and I had this conversation, we discussed this as well. So, like, when it comes to, like, okay, let me put this to you. Okay, I had an example of the example I used was Stax and Econoboi, and then it went away. I need to get Vyvanse or something. But if damn it, sorry, I was trying to chase this fucking quote. Now I can't remember. Stax, do you want to jump in?
I don't know if I have much to say. I
You're
definitely
muted.
have. Am I
I
really?
can't hear a word you're saying.
Oh, I can hear him.
You
Philip,
doing a
do you say
bit?
something?
Yeah.
He's saying
Oh
something.
my God, it's me.
Yeah, it's you.
God
This
damn it, Josiah.
fool. What an
It's this.
idiot.
Tech issues.
It's this
Oh my
right
goodness.
here.
You
see
know what I bet
this?
it was? I bet that Philip was talking to him, and then Josiah's like, "Oh, Philip's not even saying anything. Let me just pivot to someone else."
That's great.
Yeah.
I didn't. I
Nah,
didn't.
yeah,
It's the
I
split
think we
right
might
here.
just.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Is
Oh,
the
you
wire?
can-
Are your wires like split?
The wire is split.
You need
because,
like electric tape or
Tape
something?
it up, yeah.
So it's like wound. So like when I get done every night, I like put it in a circle very tight because I can't stand having clutter, and I have like literally split the thing right here. So anyway, go ahead.
Yikes.
You
Go ahead.
was it me? Philip,
Either
were
of
you?
you.
I wasn't saying
Yeah,
anything yet, but I have things to say, but I've been talking a lot.
We'd be
so-
going in circles
go
if I
for
said
it, yeah.
anything. Yeah.
Well, so on the people not land thing, I totally agree. That map bothers me so much because you're right. Like it's just a mental misunderstanding. But the intuition that I think is fair is that yes, it's not precisely that we want the land represented, and it's that we want a variety of different interests represented, and so that we assume, okay, well, here's a densely packed area. These people might have, obviously diverse interests within them, but different interests than somebody who's in a completely different part of the state or a completely different part of the country. And that's a tough balance to strike, right? And this was the primary complaint that the anti-federalists had about the centralized government at all, was that how can this government ever effectively represent a diversity of interests? It's always going to defer to particular interests within that, the powerful, the landed, the moneyed, whatever. This is also what Publius says in the Federalist Papers, is that there's always been a split between landed interest and non-landed interest, moneyed interest and non-moneyed interest. These form classes, he says. And so if you ever use class language, somebody calls you a Marxist, just cite the Federalist Papers at them. It really annoys me. But the idea, I think, is that we try to create a system that does effectively represent these different interests, which sometimes, yes, includes things that are not democratic, because that's not always the highest principle. Whether or not you're okay with that, well, you're not, these authors are not, that's fine, we can talk about that, but that was the idea, that we want effective representation of a broad variety of people, somehow balanced against the intuition that yes, ultimately what gives a government legitimacy and force and power is the voice of the people, represented by usually the majority in legislation.
Econoboi, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I understand where the founders were coming from at the time. I mean, Thomas Jefferson specifically had, the more I've looked into the history of socialism and the more I look into Thomas Jefferson, he had almost like this proto-socialist type viewpoint where he was very, almost like egalitarian for his time. And he had this idea that everybody should, and now obviously to be clear for all the obviously he was a slave owner, for God's sakes. He was a total piece of shit in that regard. But, he had this idea that everybody should basically be a small farmer, and he had this distributionist type mindset, which served as the foundation actually for a socialist thought, where socialists kind of come out of this school of thought where everybody should own their own plot of land, and this is a way to guarantee a more egalitarian economic distribution. But so the founders had this great fear of divergent interests leading to very divergent outcomes, and differences in authority and stuff like that. And it was the more almost like class interested founders who were more in favor of a strong central government, right? People who like Jefferson and Hamilton, who were a little bit less concerned about sort of class interests than Thomas Jefferson and the more like farmer agrarian type people. So I understand all that. I just think that times have changed significantly. And for its time, the American democracy was quite a radical democratic experiment. But our European cousins are quick learners, and they've sort of outpaced us in this regard. And many of our Southeast Asian allies have outpaced us as well. And, Indo-Pacific region, I just think that a lot of countries have figured out how to make a more majoritarian system work. And although my ideal would be some sort of, proportional parliamentary system, if it was just like Econoboi just doing whatever he wanted to American institutions, I would recognize that you're going to end up somewhere in between, at least for a while in my lifetime. So I think, engaging in a deliberative process to try and get rid of the Electoral College, get rid of gerrymandering, maybe institute a different voting system for members of the House, so it's a bit more proportional, stuff like that, I think is it's pretty realistic, and certainly a type of system that protects liberties. I mean, obviously Josiah's and whatever this book's idea of getting changing the thresholds for how we amend the Constitution, well, that would take a constitutional amendment. So I don't really think that's going to change anytime soon, unfortunately. So
yeah, it's amazing how even like 50 years ago, how close we were to certain radical reforms. It was under President Nixon that we nearly abolished the Electoral College. It came perilously close to happening, and now it's just like you can't even imagine. Because here's the other thing too, and I think again they make this pretty compelling in the book, which is, Philip, the other problem is that our current systems, such as they are, don't incentivize one of two major political parties to actually try to court the best interests and the consent of the majority. It's funny. I actually have more faith in the Republican Party's ability to win competitive popular vote elections than Republicans do. They've just made their peace with it. And so they look to either via gerrymandering in places like Wisconsin and North Carolina and other places, playing games with the Supreme Court so they can pack that particular institution. This game incentivizes a race to the bottom. And I think that's something also I'm curious what you would do about that, because, vote harder to elect Democrats. Yeah, that only works if Democrats are able to change the thing to keep their footing, right? Because of the current population trends and political trends such as they are. By I think it's like 2040, you will have, 30% of the country in terms of population electing 70 senators and 70% of the population electing 30 senators. Like, the way this system was set up and has been modified over time right now is just rapidly accelerating to even more minoritarian rule than it already is. And so then you're completely dependent on the largesse and good faith of Republicans. And we've talked about this before, and I know you will not defend the Republican Party as a good faith party. So again, I need you to give me something. What can I get? Because it's like, you compared it to Monopoly before, but I'm just trying to imagine a game where one side is so crazy advantaged and they are just absolute assholes about it too. Like, on top of it, it's like they press every advantage they possibly can. They try to exacerbate the advantages further. They prevent rule changes, which would rebalance things. That's a spiral for disaster. Mm-hmm. And also, there's a timeline where you do get enough people sufficiently politically motivated who are pissed off, and they're like, you know what, Philip, you wouldn't give me these incremental changes along the way to make it a bit more fair. So now I'm just going to abolish the Republican Party. If you're a fucking conservative, you can't vote in this country. Like, there's a Josiah in the timeline somewhere who's so pissed off at the GOP that that's happening. So what would you be prepared? What, as a political scientist, do you think needs to change to prevent further problems like that? Because this will, even if it doesn't come to fruition, you will eventually get a sufficiently progressive or sufficiently bold president if there is a conservative Supreme Court who engages in non-acquiescence and tells the court to fuck off. You and what army? And then we have another constitutional crisis. Like, there has to be a rebalancing.
How do you prevent
to give,
Josiah from taking his pitchfork out?
Would you recommend to rebalance the scales?
Well, before I answer, as a political scientist, I will remind everyone that anytime I'm talking with Josiah, I'm far out of my depth on practical politics, because I, for one, academia is removed from practical politics as much as is physically possible. But also, I spend most of my time in political theory, which is quite different. But I do dabble in American politics. I'm not answering from any point of expertise here. I would say first, like, I don't know what particular mechanisms you would grab a hold of to punish these sorts of things. Because if it's truly as bad as you're describing, if Republicans have the advantages you were describing, I'm not entirely sure how you solve those without just, winning more elections and sort of punishing them in the rules that you're able to make. And so,
right. No, correct. Well, hang on, just to clarify.
Yeah.
Precisely. That's, but you have to win the elections. and then you have to change things about the institutions or the rules to make it easier for you to win the next set of elections, right? Like basically, it's not enough to just briefly maintain your footing and hope you can get to that same level of footing the next time. You actually have to step forward. So that's my question: is what rules and institutions would you like, okay, that's fair for Democrats to change to make the reality of electoral politics in the 21st century more competitive and less broken as they currently are?
I mean, I think we saw some models for this in the sort of voting reforms that were passed kind of in extremis during the pandemic that obviously became very controversial in the Trump stuff. But this is, one of the biggest proposals that these two authors have are things relating to making voting easier. National voter IDs, voting holiday, all these sorts of things. And I feel like these are things that if you do have any belief in, yes, the voice of the people should matter. Lowering thresholds for voting should be a fairly nonpartisan thing to fight for. Now, of course, right now, Democrats are confident. I think they're right that higher voting turnout will be beneficial for them. But in the long term, I think that could always change. So that would be something that I think is quite easy to do. I think something else that I don't know how you fix this, but some of the problems we're describing are some of the fears that I have, or that Econoboi is talking about, like the rise of populist parties or populist candidates, for example, are really a consequence of a weakening party system where our parties just kind of suck at being parties now. And I don't know how you actually fix that. But you don't have the 2016 election and the sort of circus on the debate stage and Trump coming out of that as the party's nominee in the old strong party system. Something broke, between the beginning of the 20th century and 2016 in the way that the parties actually ran their shows. And I think it broke in such a way that now things are just like fully getting out of hand. So I don't know how you fix that. I also don't know how you fix the sort of like reciprocal escalating cycles of violating previous norms, something that, again, these authors talk about a lot, right? Like where for a decent chunk of time, things like judicial appointments were fairly non-controversial and almost unanimous. And then we have, especially following Clinton, this like back and forth cycle of, well, you screwed with us, so we're going to screw with you. I don't know where that stops. I don't know exactly how to do it unless somebody's willing to say, no, we're not going to do that anymore. But of course, nobody should at this point, because you're giving up the game if you're letting them take advantage of the rules and you're not. So I don't have good policy proposals. That's why I'm a political theorist. I decided to avoid that as much as I could.
Hey, listen, I think there's still utility there. I'm not going to discount that whatsoever. I'm curious if perhaps Econoboi, especially, but even Stax, could talk you into one, because obviously you and I we have long disagreed on this. But Econoboi, what do you think, like on that matter? Like, I know you share more of my concern, which is, to me, the reason that the rules have to change is because, as bad as they are now, in many respects, they are getting considerably worse, and they're exacerbating minoritarian rule. And it's just like a self-accelerating cycle. Like the momentum is purely there. Barring a constitutional amendment, what are things that you would like to see? You mentioned abolishing the filibuster. And again, Philip, along the way, if Econoboi says something where, you would either oppose it or you're like, wait a minute, can we just like let him know? Because I think that could be interesting.
Yeah. On the Three Wonks podcast, we had an episode about, I think it was titled something like what is everything we would change about American institutions? And we kind of go through this, and we have two different sections. One section is kind of things that we might be able to pass under a united democratic government, and then things that if we could just do anything we wanted, what would we do? And the things that I suggested that we could pass under united democratic government were things like statehood for various sort of overseas territories, or at the very least, like just in-out referendums, so if you want to be your own country, do that. If you want to be a state, do that. Mm-hmm. But this like weird sort of post-colonial type situation just probably isn't tenable if you ask me. I think you could also argue for something similarly radical with Native American reservations, where not that every single reservation should be its own state, but I mean, it does seem intuitively, it seems kind of weird that we have this sort of quasi state level government for Native Americans. So like, I don't know, maybe you give Native Americans like their population wide senator and House members or something. But it does seem quite strange to me the way that we govern Native Americans in this country, and I'm frankly I'm not really sure if it's the most democratic if we really think about it. I'd have to think about that more personally. But there's that as well. Getting rid of the Electoral College through like the National Interstate Voter Compact. I think you could do that without an amendment, and I think it would be actually pretty constitutionally justifiable that you could do that. Ending gerrymandering, changing to some sort of a ranked choice or approval voting system for all offices, having open primaries be the standard, having 2 weeks of early voting, a national voting holiday, stuff like that. I don't know if I think the Constitution does prescribe when we have to have our elections. I think it says we have to have it in November.
Times, manners, and places, they're subject to the states. Yeah.
Okay, so if we could change the date that we have our election, I would make it a Saturday in the summer instead of a Tuesday in the winter. That seems a lot more like intuitive to me in terms of just promoting people to go out and go to the polls. I would pay people to vote. So like if you vote, you get $100. Again, just trying to encourage people to go out and fill out a ballot, I think is pretty important. Getting rid of money in politics is another thing that we would probably want to do. All of these things in general are motivated by the idea that democracies rely on faith very substantially, right? And for instance, when you see the breakdown, the very slow breakdown of like Iranian democracy as well, but you see Iraqi democracy having a similar like sort of slow breakdown, and Afghan democracy had a very quick breakdown. I think the reason that a lot of those democratic models didn't really succeed was because people understood that my vote doesn't really matter. Like the government's so corrupt in my country. The vote is so fraudulent. The turnout rates are so low that what's even really the point in voting, right? And I think in America, people have legitimately a lot of reason to say my vote just doesn't matter, right? I'm a Democrat that lives in Texas. Well, what really is the point of a guy like me going out and to vote? Probably not really, if you think about it. Like behaviorally, doesn't really make much sense that I should go out and vote. I live in a Republican district. Why should I go out and vote? What the fuck's the point? Like, guy's going to win anyway. I'm just one person, especially when there's all these different systems that I mentioned as well. So I would probably change all of those things. And I think that in general would engender a confidence into people to be like, hey, my vote actually does matter because we have all of these different mechanisms for, popular.
I'll also
popular
add there
amendment.
just real quick while I'm thinking about it. And I don't know, I'm sure this has been studied, but I can't think of anything offhand. I would just intuitively expect that the presence of the Electoral College will also further depress voter turnout, because how many people say I'm not even going to bother to vote because this state is almost certainly going to swing red and this state's almost always certainly going to swing blue.
No, that's exactly right. Especially in a system where the guy who doesn't get the most votes can win. right. So like, especially in that scenario, whereas if we didn't have an Electoral College, I would be just as motivated as somebody from Vermont to go out and vote. Like the Electoral College, functionally, what it does is it disproportionately advantages rural states, right? Where like the proportional say in who becomes president, I think that if you did the math, like a person from Vermont has 4 times the voting power as somebody from Texas, right? And so that's obviously pretty ridiculous if you just care about, what would motivate or engender the will for people to go out and vote. We still obviously have tens of millions of people who go out and vote despite all of these things in all of these states that I'm mentioning, but these are the marginal things. Like maybe we would have structurally 5% higher turnout, which would, that would be a million plus voters extra each, election cycle, which I think would make a difference. Also, again, just it's more democratic. So, that's always good, I suppose. I suppose. Right. So,
yeah.
Well, I was going to, unless you cut out there, now I'm curious, unless somebody said something, but I still think we're ignoring the 9 elephants in the room. What about the Supreme Court? Because anything that can be done by federal statute under judicial review, they could theoretically strike it all down.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not constitutionally viable. There's no dumbass. There's actually, like we get so reductive sometimes in our language. We say this person's stupid. There's no such thing as a stupid Supreme Court justice. They are all exceptionally well-read and well-spoken, and they can write bullshit legalese to justify any decision. That's the beauty of being the highest court in the land, right? We see it all the time. So, you say like the constitutional viability of the I'm blanking on it again, the compact, the
National Interstate Voter Compact.
Right. But I mean, Supreme Court Justice Devil's Advocate Josiah could write 40 pages
Yeah.
and cite all the historic precedent in the world and just basically say at the end, fuck you, it's unconstitutional. So I feel like if we're going to like these things which could happen under united democratic governance, again, with a sufficient majority that would be willing to break the filibuster, you would also probably need to seriously consider revoking the federal statute which keeps the Supreme Court composition at 9, because you'll never impeach a Supreme Court justice, right? That requires, again, a supermajority in the Senate. You're not going to get that, and that's assuming you get a majority to vote to impeach in the House, which is, there really is no guarantee. I don't know if we had a supermajority right now in the United States Senate and we still had control of the House. I don't know if we would ever vote to impeach Clarence Thomas over his ethics violations, right? I don't know how much of an appetite there is. It seems like there's more of an appetite, generally speaking, to impeach presidents than there are Supreme Court justices. I digress.
Right.
So, Econoboi, are you prepared?
I mean, the issue is, like, I think that, so number one, I mean, obviously, I wouldn't mind.
Wait, no. I'm sure there's wisdom coming through. Hang on.
Oh my goodness.
Say something.
No.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that of course it could be the case that Democrats might not be willing to pack the court in a world where they've overruled all these things. But I think the problem is that some of the things that I described are like so constitutionally, like there's so much precedent behind them. Like, are they gonna rule that you just can't make territory states anymore? Oh yeah, it turns out the framers thought 50. We started at 13. It turns out 50 was the cap. George Washington, what would they say, right? I mean,
honestly, like I could see them going. Like, we've had 46 presidents. 46 is really close to 50. It sounds like that's like a really good number. We don't really need to exceed it. We've already exceeded it.
It's the divine number.
Right. It's a divine number. And really, if anything, we need to get rid of 4 blue states to bring it down to 46.
I think as well. But I think one thing that I think is worth keeping in mind as well is that part of the reason why we're seeing this rise in right-wing populism and this sort of like structural conservatism sort of take hold in this country is because we literally have a disproportionately large amount of old people, right? Like people think of the baby boom and they think of like, oh, like a long time ago, there was a lot of babies that got born, but they don't really carry that forward and realize there's literally just proportionally a larger number of old conservative people who are disproportionately likely to vote because for all of history, older people have been more likely to vote than younger people. And so, I think that, 20 years goes by and you end up with, I don't know, like 25, 30% less boomers than we have now. And you have people like millennials and young Gen Xers become in their prime earning years and, in they're sort of, they're going to vote at much higher rates than they do now. And we see that millennials, even especially so, are substantially more stubbornly liberal and left of center than previous generations. Gen Z is not exactly a conservative bunch based on current political polling of Gen Z. The ones that are old enough to vote, like the oldest Gen Zers. And so I don't expect this trend to stop. And so I think that the risk is that Trump could get elected and the Republicans could do so much damage to American institutions that we literally just don't have democracy anymore in the future. But I will say that I think that assuming we can weather the storm of Trump populism for the next 4 to 8 years, I think that at that point, the demographic advantage becomes like so substantial for, I don't even want to say advantage. It just, we reorient ourselves to a pre-baby boom amount of elderly people who are disproportionately conservative. And I think at that point, you do see a great moderation of Republican politics in that world. Because otherwise,
see,
they're
I mean,
polling
again,
at
I'd have to like really sketch this out, and perhaps I should have already. But obviously, I agree that there, in terms of like public sentiment, there's going to be a massive and overwhelming demographic shift, which disadvantages the Republican Party as we know it today. But that's why I think like these institutions, which already entrenched minoritarian rule in some cases just due to its composition and migration patterns, the fact that liberals are leaving blue or congregating even more than they were. That's why we're going to see in 2040 again. I think it's 2040, maybe 2050. I think it's 2040. That shift in the Senate. So it's like, yes, it's really important that we take advantage of that demographic shift, but we also, it's almost like I don't know if there's like a compound interest effect of these rules to change such that we may get to a point where even with an overwhelming, not even 55%, but a 65%, 70% advantage in terms of support for various policy proposals, that the rules just simply wouldn't allow for us to affect those changes. Like, because again, the thing I keep going back to, and I bitch about it all the time on this channel, is the Supreme Court. Like I also read theory, and I also, I'm reading contemporary books as well. And one thing I just simply cannot square is how powerful the United States Supreme Court has become. I mean, political scientists, including small c conservatives, have also complained about it. I mean, they call it judicial activism, right? So this is nothing new. I think more increasing number of people and normies are being made aware of it. But I mean, think about it. We talk about, again, co-equal branches, but Congress, the legislature, was always conceived to be the most powerful. Yes, in many ways, the most ponderous. That's why we had a bicameral legislature, right? That power was supposed to be unwieldy, but it's the one who can impose its will constitutionally on the other two branches in ways that the other two can't. Like, again, the veto. And the veto works, I think, 90% of the time. But in theory, a Congress could strike down every goddamn veto offered by any president. And there's nothing the president can do about it. And you can impeach presidents and Supreme Court justices, and you can rewrite the Constitution or impose amendments which are not subject to judicial review. And then over the years, the president became functionally the most powerful of the three branches, because it's the federal government. The executive branch is by far the biggest of the three branches. You've got law enforcement, you've got the military, you've got the sword, so to speak, and he's certainly the most agile because he doesn't have to share power with 535 other people like you do in the Senate and so on and so forth. But then the Supreme Court gets the final say, at least in the system as we currently understand.
Well, but imagine a worst case scenario, right?
All the federal statutes you propose. Fuck. Were you talking this whole time?
Yes. Well, no, he just interrupted you a little bit.
Damn it.
I don't know. I don't even know if it.
No, I was saying, like, even if we imagine a worst case scenario, right? Like, let's imagine that Trump wins in 2024, and let's imagine that Clarence Thomas, leaves the court under some circumstance. Same thing with Justice Alito. And let's imagine Sonia Sotomayor dies, and so the court is now 7-2, radically, even more radically conservative. And let's say that we're now in an environment in 2028. Well, let's say that in the last 4 years, the Supreme Court has ruled that abortion is illegal nationwide, that gay marriage is illegal nationwide, or at the very least, it's left up to the states. That Congress has no legal authority to regulate Wall Street, which is something they're actually currently considering, that minimum wages are illegal, that the government, the income tax, or not the income tax, they couldn't possibly say that about the income tax.
They fucking gutted the EPA. They gutted the pre-clearance. I'm sorry.
Exactly. And let's just say that, they rule all of these things nationally illegal. And now we're in 2028. Look at the electoral backlash and the backlash on the institutional confidence in the Supreme Court, just from saying that abortion is a states' rights issue, right? So you can still get abortions in like a majority of U.S. states, and I think it's trending more towards almost every state because the electoral backlash has been so broad, and so we now have this even more radical court that rules all of these things are illegal. Obviously, there's going to be an incredibly awful transition time where so many problems obviously are associated with what I just described. But at the end of the day, I think that the electoral backlash would be insane in that scenario. It would be insane. And I think that we'd end up in an environment where there are so many Democrats that get elected. We'd have 300 members of the House. We'd have 60 plus members of the Senate. We'd have obviously a progressive president, to where at that point, if the Supreme Court has ruled that we can't regulate Wall Street, we can't establish minimum wages, we can't have welfare programs, maybe the ACA is ruled unconstitutional, we don't have abortion nationwide, we don't have gay marriage anymore. In that environment, I think we're going to be okay packing the court. I think that's going to happen. I think at that point, it's like, guys, we need to pack the court. Okay?
Listen, they beat the shit out of us within an inch of our lives. That's when we're at our most powerful. Man, I don't know, dude. I'm telling you,
are they going to rule voting for Democrats unconstitutional? Like at a certain point, I fucking
Alito right now is drafting an opinion. He's like, you know what? It keeps saying Republic, not democracy. Democrats, they have most of the words of democracy in their fucking party title. I don't see where Democrats are constitutional. I could see fucking Samuel Alito draft. I mean, but my point is, I do believe, I think that a lot of the things that you and I want, I think the Supreme Court is a significant hurdle to that. And that's where
what I just described would be one of the most catastrophic 4 years in American history. But I think that we've had very catastrophic years of American history, and we've always had an ability of people to respond radically to those catastrophic scenarios and elect radical governments to address those scenarios. And it's tended in the long run to work out. We can think about obviously FDR's presidency, where coming out of the Great Depression, we elect a radically democratic government who institutes all these new programs. And although he wasn't successful in packing the court, he was ultimately successful in pressuring the Supreme Court to basically hop off his dick.
the New Deal.
Yeah. And so, again, I think that in such an environment where if the Supreme Court really fucked around, I think they would really find out. And I do think that we would. I don't think that even in the environment that I described, I don't think fundamentally the right to be able to vote and change governments would be threatened by the Supreme Court. I think the biggest threat in a Trump presidency isn't the composition of the Supreme Court. It's the composition of our administrative state. That's the scariest part of the Trump presidency is he going to fire all the generals? Is he going to get rid of all the administrators? Who
is he immune? Is he fucking? It's like, that's the other thing too.
Right.
Like, do I really think that a majority of justices will say that the president is effectively above the law? No, but I'm less confident in that than I thought, because I never thought they'd agree to take the fucking case. There's no need for it. There are constitutional scholars who are baffled that they agreed to take the case, because the DC Circuit made such a decisive ruling. It was completely discretionary. They didn't have to grant cert to do it. Yeah. And so to me, it's like, again, I feel like they're like edging us in the most authoritarian way. They're like, you like a little bit of that? It's like, I don't, that doesn't instill me with confidence at all, because if they're willing to even look in that direction, when they don't need to, I do think it's a problem. I mean, to your point about Trump wanting to get the administrative state, that's where I mean, I do think the Supreme Court's going to be a problem, because Thomas, here's the thing: they're not obligated. There's no higher authority, so they can be as wildly inconsistent as possible. So these people can simultaneously say, "Listen, we believe in the unitary executive theory, where the chief executive is the executive branch, and God damn it, no checks and balances. You can do whatever he wants." Oh, but it's authoritarian for the president to wipe out student loan debt, even though the fucking statute says waive. Right? They can completely contradict themselves, as they do all the time. I wouldn't be surprised if this court says, "Listen, it's authoritarian for you to try to, regulate stoves or to cancel student debt, but you actually have every right to make federal employees at-will employees, and you can fire them at will, because it doesn't make any sense for there to be federal employee protections for the president of the United States." And that also includes, by the way, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Like, that's the other fucking scary thing. Like, what he wants to do with independent agencies, I don't know, man. And to me, I think the court's going to aid and abet it. I don't see why they would stop it.
The president has always formally had the authority to dismiss heads of branches and to fire
for cause
employees. No. I mean, the Trump fired Comey without any constitutional issue,
I'm sorry.
right?
I thought you were talking about these independent agencies. Yeah, like some of these, obviously cabinet officials.
No, but even the Federal Reserve. I mean, the president can fire the head of the Federal Reserve. That's been as far as I understand.
For cause.
No, not for cause. For any reason.
For cause. 100% for cause. Nah.
Because the Federal Reserve chair is nominated and serves at the pleasure of the president. I don't think it's a totally independent.
I am absolutely certain the only way that Biden could fire Jerome Powell is for cause. I'm almost certain. Maybe political theorist Professor Bunn could let us know that. Do you know? I'm almost certain.
Ignorant on this particular issue.
Because why didn't Trump fire Powell in 2020? Because he want him to. What was it that he wanted Powell to do?
Because there was a sufficient number of Republicans who said, we do not fuck with the Federal Reserve. right? That I think that there's a strong norm of the president not firing the head of the Federal Reserve, but obviously Trump doesn't care much for norms. However, at the end of the day, what he wanted to fire Jeff Sessions in 2017, but he waited to get rid of Jeff Sessions because there was at the time there was a sufficient number of Republican senators who said, if you fire Jeff Sessions, we will not confirm a new attorney general, right? And there was similarly a sufficient number of Republicans in the Senate who said, we are not going to put crazy people in charge of the Federal Reserve. You can have all these crazy people running the CIA and the fucking federal FBI if you want, but the Federal Reserve is off limits for this partisan hackery. Now, to be fair, again, that could change in a 2021 or a 2025 environment where Trump is president, because the Republican Party's become even more radical since then. So I'm not discounting Trump's ability to destroy American democracy. I'm just saying that the Supreme Court itself is not the scariest institution to regulate in terms of democratic accountability. The presidency is. That's why I'm saying we need things like getting rid of the Electoral College and getting rid of money in politics and and stuff. Having more senators to hold the president accountable. That's why I'm saying all of these things. I'm much more scared of the president's authority than the Supreme Court's, which seems to be where we disagree. So.
I was looking here, and NPR. I can't find that because I'm also trying to pinch this so I can listen to your.
Wait, really quick,
lovely
Josiah.
voice.
Somebody in the chat. Here's the thing. Somebody says, if we pack the courts, they pack the courts. Well, that's the thing, Evolved Monkey. Let's just run this radical experiment down, where eventually every.
Wait a minute. Let me
American's
find it.
part
Let
of
me
the
find it so I
Supreme
can pull it
Court.
up. Where did you do? Where? What was this?
It's the most recent one.
Evolved Monkey. Look, eventually,
go.
every American's a part of the Supreme Court, and that would be a beautiful thing if you ask me. Okay, totally popular Athenian democracy. Okay, so let's run that down. Let's eventually get millions of members of the Supreme Court. You give every American a good-paying job on the Supreme Court. I think that's a good direction to go in, if you ask me, Evolved Monkey.
I am so tired of like this brinkmanship thing. Like this, God damn it, this is. I'm not going to rant. I'm just going to say that this is not a turn-based RPG. They don't need us to fuck with the norm first in order for them to fuck with it. They've done it before. With the blue slips, this is the thing that it's my mission in life. If I could get Dick Durbin to revoke blue slips for district judges, I'll die a happy man. Fuck the Supreme Court. Fuck winning the next election. If I could just get Dick Durbin, the Senate chairman of the Judiciary Committee, to say, you know what, maybe we don't let Republicans block nominees to district courts in their state. It's been a gentleman's agreement that both parties have had for decades, and Republicans broke it for circuit court judges in 2017 under Trump. We didn't have to do anything first. They were just like, hey, you know what would be cool? If like blue state senators didn't have the ability to give Trump the finger and we could just cram any far right lunatic we want into those positions. Let's just do that. So this idea that, if we do it, they're going to do it more. I'm not saying break norms recklessly, but this idea, what's the alternative? Evolved Monkey. Nothing. Then it's just, it advantages the status quo, advantages them anyway. And then I'm just too spiteful to even let that happen. So let's see here. What did he say? Watch our White House series called "The Scheme About Republicans Taking Over the Courts," and it's jaw dropping. Wait, I'm confused. Now you sound eminently reasonable. You're citing Sheldon Whitehouse, who's one of the finest senators. Like, what is your position, sir?
Account. It's Peace Goes Alt. He couldn't be here, but he's in the chat antagonizing us. But no, does that make sense? I just think I think that I think the presidency is a much more scary office than the collective Supreme Court. I mean, because again, even this Supreme Court, ultimately what they did was they threw Roe v. Wade back to the states, and they said it's just a state issue. And I just think that's less scary than the idea that Trump is going to fire all the generals who disagree with him implementing a coup. Well,
I mean, that's the more proximate threat. I agree. I mean, like I think that Trump is more reckless with and more openly authoritarian than even the craziest member, Alito, of the United States Supreme Court. So I take your point. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just feel like Philip, I don't know if you know this, but one of the things I've been doing since college is I have this like ongoing Word doc, and it's called GOP Proof Your Government. And it's like I used to play a lot of like real-time strategy games, and so like the conceit is this: God is real, and God gives you Venezuela, and He says, Philip, You have Venezuela with its natural resources and its current population, and right now you're dictator for life, and you must create a functioning Republican government that is Donald Trump proof, that is Mitch McConnell proof, where long after you're dead, you don't have to reasonably worry that some schmuck is going to come in and fuck the whole thing up. And that's like a game I like to play with myself, and
I could do it. I'm up to the challenge.
No, you just heard him
100%.
say that's a game. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm a child who just said
Yeah,
play with
I heard
himself, and I couldn't help it. But anyway,
Unbelievable.
that is.
I did
that's
laugh
a
to
game.
myself too. But yeah,
That's a
continue.
game. I was like, that's a Freudian slip. But yeah, so I guess we'll end on this. Is there anything that in such a game you would do differently than the United States as it's currently conceived? As a theorist, you can just spitball here. We're not going to clip it and hold you to it.
I will.
I mean,
you can't.
probably, but I'd need to think about it. I mean, the difficulty with this is, I think, going back to my original point, constitution making is a really intense process, because what you are doing is, like you said, you're setting something up that will hopefully far outlive you, and hopefully be sort of resilient against some of the worst tendencies that we all know exist in politics. So you have to balance a lot of competing interests. You have to have concern for legitimacy and like practical issues and theoretical issues. And it's a ridiculously hard process. And I don't envy the people who did it. And this is one of the reasons why there are like 3 or 4 different Federalist Papers where the various authors will say, by the way, before you go about criticizing this, think about how damn hard it was to even get you this document that you've got in front of you to consider, and how how many competing interests had to be like adjudicated between. Like, it was really hard. Okay, so give us some grace, basically. And so I don't have anything in particular that I feel like I could just snap my fingers and say like this is what would solve the Donald Trump problem, because I think one thing that I learned from the other Levitsky and Ziblatt book, their first book, How Democracies Die, is that, just an interesting thing that has happened in the past is that a lot of governments that had democratic institutions and the sort of safeguards that we would hope would keep somebody from eroding those democratic institutions fell prey to some sort of populist or anti-democratic leader coming into power and using the mechanisms available to him to shore that up.
President
so I don't think anything's
Washington-
foolproof.
President Washington warned against that in his farewell address about how demagogues and sufficiently cunning men of no principle. He basically, with a giant tower with his name on it, he prophesied Trump coming. He warned against that.
Actually, speaking of Jefferson earlier, he also warned against people who would attempt to suggest that you could be moral without religion, and to be very wary of the people who would try to suggest that to you and try to undermine the influence of
That's
religion.
going to be the
So,
next debate.
I'll
moderate.
there's something that's been in the back of my mind since Econoboi talked. Is like, yeah, Jefferson's great, but man, he's an outlier in almost every.
Yeah.
almost
Well, that's the
every-
thing. Like the founders, I feel like a lot of people have these almost like saint-like ideals for what the founders were, and I feel like if you could reconstruct the atomic remains of the founders and bring them into the modern world, I think that they would radically change their views on how to set up our institution. Now, some of them wouldn't. I'm sure some of them would basically just be the same old, very conservative. Like, I mean, to be fair, like the first response from the founders would probably be like, man, there's a lot of black people in leadership. What's up with that? They probably wouldn't use the word black people, though, to be clear. But
Right.
like, they would have radically different views, I think, on how we should set up these institutions. And I think that if the founders were to see that the institutions that they set up led to a man like Donald Trump being elected, I think they'd probably think twice about.
Yeah,
some of the things
Washington
that-
would be looking at his farewell address, look at Trump, look at the farewell address, look at Trump again, then be like, did none of you read this shit? I basically gave his social security number in the text. It's a footnote. You all didn't listen to shit.
Well, like people, like Democrats will say the same thing about the Second Amendment. They'll say like, oh, if the founders could have seen basically like how this amendment would be interpreted over time and the type of technology available to the general population, they probably would have changed their views significantly on how to manage sort of personal firearms, right? And it's not to say that they would be against the Second Amendment, but it is to say like, well, yeah, they'd probably change their view though. There'd probably be a much different inaction of the Second Amendment if they knew where that would lead. Because after all, like people say the founder, so the founders could have never imagined this really dumbass. And it's like, well, no, obviously not. The founders could not have, the founders did not have a conception for what social media would be. That did not exist. There was no idea of what that would look like. And similarly, the nuclear bomb. Do we really think the founders had any conception of what a nuclear bomb would be? No, of course not. Their technology in a society just advances sufficiently beyond what our understanding could have possibly been at the time. How could we possibly predict what society will look like 500 years from now? It's impossible, right? And so, yeah, I mean, obviously, I've always found these founding father arguments very weird because the founding fathers were not saints. They weren't divine beings. They were people just like us, and they were actually quite young people. And so, obviously, if we took those people and put them into our modern day, I think, of course, it would be the case that they would change their view on how we might organize society. And that's why I just don't think fundamentally we should put much stock in what the founders' conception of government would have been. It's interesting to think about from a historical perspective, but not from, applying that standard to today. It's always seemed a little ridiculous to me.
Yeah, I've never understood that either in terms of like giving undue deference to people that way. And I think they made it abundantly clear that they didn't expect undue deference. I mean, they brought up the amendment process for a reason. And Stax, I know you got to go. You can head out, and we're going to wrap up here.
Sorry, no, thanks so much.
Anyway, so that's fine. Well, I hate you. By the way, you know what the founding? Wait a minute. Do you know what the founders definitely would not have conceived of?
What's that?
That some 200 years later, there'd be some prick who voted for Jill Stein in a consequential election and is single-handedly responsible for Donald Trump's ascension.
Yeah, George Washington would be like, maybe parties are okay, actually.
Exactly.
Maybe I am that guy. Pretty chill with that.
Voting for a woman. Right. My God.
True.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. See you guys.
See you, man. All right. So, but yeah, I just this notion of undue deference to the founders. I don't think that they even expected to be as venerated as they were. I don't recall anything in the writing that suggests as much, and certainly it's not in the structure of this country. I mean, the Constitution isn't a static document. But
I think that, but I wouldn't say. Yeah, I understand the concept of like undue deference, and like I said, I'm not like a dogmatic on the issue of like originalism as some people are. I think what I would say is that I think that there are a lot of people who go into these conversations about institutional reform with a perspective that bothers me in the sense that they'll say things like, well, why would it even be this way? Isn't it obvious that it should be like this? Isn't this anti-democratic? Isn't this undemocratic? And as if, they're the first people to sort of stumble across this. And so I think the sort of, not just in a historical curiosity sense, but in the sense of like, if you want to actually understand the arguments for why we might want it to be the case that XYZ, you probably should look at why it was made that way and what sort of arguments propped it up. You can find flaws in those arguments maybe, but I think you're right in the sense that like they'd probably be really troubled if you could show them Donald Trump and be like, man, wish it wasn't that way. But I do think they were pretty cognizant of the fact that the institution that they were creating was not foolproof and could lead to the appointment of some pretty terrible people. The idea was to like make it as unlikely as possible that somebody that terrible could make it that far through these sort of filtering process.
Well, they might go the opposite way. They might say, like, they might have said, "Oh, John Adams was right. Maybe we should just have had a monarchical, style system."
Well,
and maybe this marginal democratic experiment shouldn't have become so outsized at some point. But that's the point: is that these founding fathers would have, they would have changed their views in such a way that I think would have disgusted the types of people that like to wheel out the founding fathers as an example of how we should have ultimately governed ourselves even to this day, right? I think they would have been quite radically different. So,
well, what's funny is, I mean, my God, I've said this before, but contemplate this, and again, this isn't. I'm not alone in this observation. I'm almost certain that there are professional political scientists who would concur, which is, you talk about the monarchical system. You could easily make the case that the United Kingdom is a much more stable democracy and nation state than we are. And they have they actually have a sovereign. Like this is the thing is so bewildering. They don't have a written constitution. They have a sovereign. Technically they have a bicameral legislature, but the House of Lords is just window dressing at this point. They have no purpose. And their high court is nowhere near as powerful. Their Supreme Court is nowhere near as powerful as ours. And they're more stable. It's kind of fascinating to me. And so if you look at other, you look at other advanced democracies too, many of them are constitutional monarchies. And I'm shocked. Like
maybe that whole revolution We might have just been wasting our time. You know, the UK, they turned out. I mean, look at
They
them. They turned
did.
out fine.
I mean, like, it's so fucking, it's crazy. Like, and then of course, irony of ironies. And I keep going back to this because I'm sorry. I think it's so gut wrenching is that we're having a serious conversation of whether presidents are effectively de facto sovereigns.
Yeah.
Like, that's so gross. I just like, to me, I'm sorry. And I know I say this because I know Philip does not believe this as a small c conservative. But like when I hear this idea that should we have a debate over whether presidents can assassinate their political rivals or can order a coup? Like they took the most absurd hypothetical and they're like, hold my beer, I've got one for you. What if the president orders a coup? And then Trump's attorneys are like, well, I mean, like, I can see an argument. Like,
That would be an
to
official
me,
act.
yes, to me, the fact that that's being seriously discussed, we have failed or we are failing as an experiment. You want to talk about like a counterfactual that we know for sure involving the founders. If you convened the founders and said, hey, did you all intend for the president to be sovereign? They'd shoot you with a musket and say the Constitution is sovereign.
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution is sovereign. The president is merely chief executive. It's so fucking gross. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what we'll end on. Philip, you got to tell me, as a political theorist, as a political theory professor, as somebody who is a small c conservative, does it not really weird you out to hear some of this, like,
it's
thirst for a sovereign?
Yeah, it's kind of insane. I mean, it really is. To me, it goes back to some of our central disagreements, which to me, I just see this as sort of a culmination of the kind of power politics I see being played on both sides. That like this is sort of an end, not an end, a predictable outcome of this kind of escalation. I think something that like I listened to the whole oral arguments, and I've listened to a lot of the arguments about it on the as many pro-Trump people as I could find who were articulate, which aren't many. And I think there's like a fundamental like brain block going on, which is there's an intuition that I think is fair, which is that the president obviously has wide latitude to do a lot of things that don't need to be written down in advance, and that's something that is should be completely intuitive. I mean, like it's what Locke calls executive prerogative, right? But even there, and Locke, he says, well, you know, there's nothing that stops the legislature from coming back, you know, when they're in session again. They say, hey, the executive did that thing. We didn't say before that he couldn't do it, so we're not saying it was bad that he did necessarily. We're not going to impeach him. We're not going to execute him. But we're going to write down in a law that says he can't do that in the future. He says, that's perfectly fine. That's, you know, you're narrowing the bounds of executive prerogative, and you can do that. And if it comes to the point where the executive does something that the people say, hey, that's so bad, we don't want you to do that, and the legislature isn't able to check him for whatever reason, they're not in session, whatever, he says, well, guess what? It's between you and God. You guys can take up arms and fight against it. Like the idea that it's a completely unchecked power that overcomes the sovereignty of the people who are supreme. It's just insane. Yeah, I can't even. It's unfathomable to me in every way. So
it's going to be interesting to see what you're teaching 10, 20 years from now, because so many of the examples that, you know, political historians, political theorists cite are from centuries ago. And you're living in a time where political theory is genuinely being crafted in a fundamental way in real time. Because you could easily make the case that Trump United States versus Trump with respect to the question of presidential immunity, could easily make the case that is one of the most consequential Supreme Court cases in the history of this country. And even though I think it's an open and shut constitutional question that they need not have ever opened the door to, the fact that they did, as far as I'm concerned, this is a top 10. This is I feel like you will be talking about this as you near retirement.
I can't wait for in like 25 years when enough stuff has been declassified, enough people have passed away, to where we can finally get a full forensic accounting of all the things Trump did as president, because that will be fascinating to see what that truly inside view was. And it'll have to take 20 years, because you know you'll have to have enough people die and enough things be declassified and you know to where it's like we can kind of talk about this a little bit more openly, and that's going to be quite a historical project in the future.
Well, I mean, you're talking about, you know, when he was president. What about when he wins the second term and becomes God Emperor for the duration of his natural lifespan? You know, that's when I really want the documents to be unsealed. in 20 years when I'm in the gulag for pondering politics, and Econoboi, you in your giant E, mask are right beside me.
I'll be
Philip will be all right.
executed. That's how
Yeah.
my face reveal will be the 2027 round of public executions by the Trump government. So
yeah, Philip. So when you're the only one who survives out of the three of us, I hope you do a deep dive into God Emperor Trump's administration.
I'll
but
dedicate
yeah, this
it
is
to y'all in memoriam. Yeah.
Please do. But no, listen, I appreciate you coming on for this, and I expected that we would not resolve this because I think it's just an ongoing tension because there are no clear answers to this, especially when you look at how you would even possibly get some of these things passed, set aside the legislative barriers, but then the Supreme Court, then the constitutional barriers, et cetera, and so forth. But I do think we have a serious. We do have we're in a state where we're in a serious state of decline. I think in terms of our civic structure. I think that some of these things are, again, just constantly exacerbated. And I don't even think they necessarily even need, in some cases, Republicans or bad faith actors, let's just say a bad faith minoritarian party to actively make it worse. I think that some of these things have been set up that they just naturally become worse on their own. And I think we have a real problem because it's going to do. And I say this as somebody in the opposing party in that respect, it's just going to piss us off more. And I again, I've said this before, like as somebody who's advocated for Democrats to play more ruthlessly, it makes me lust for an opportunity for Democrats to really give Republicans a taste of their own medicine.
He lusts for it.
I lust for it. I lust for it right now. That's why I gave the Freudian slip of playing with myself earlier. I mean, these things just naturally follow. There's going to be a lot more of me who are like, when we get our hands on the levers of power, we're going to want to correct, not just in a moderate way, but also 50% out of spite to be like, because like you said, there's a tit for tat here. I think that Democrats right now actually don't engage in nearly as often. That will eventually change. We're actually seeing that right now with the House of Representatives, the freshman class, like Jared Moskowitz, Jasmine Crockett, Dan Goldman. These freshman class of Democrats are really starting to stick it to Republicans when and where possible. Now, it's usually in the form of messaging bills because they're in the minority. But I promise you, unless something changes, when they actually take the majority, I do expect that there's going to be. I wouldn't be surprised. Let me put it to you like this: I would be surprised if Donald Trump wins a second term. I think if Democrats win the House and Trump wins a second term, impeachment begins the next day. I think,
I can't wait. The thing for the people listening, I feel like there's this fear mongering that Republicans will end democracy. What with them actively trying to do that on a daily basis, it seems like. But then I feel like Republicans will attempt to be like, well, when the Democrats take over, well, all this socialism, and it's like, guys, when what Josiah is describing inevitably happens, it's going to be so great. Okay, we're going to have healthcare finally. We're going to have free college. We're going to tax the rich. Okay, it's just all going to be
Philip,
good
as a college
stuff.
professor, is going to be working for free. No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly. Philip will now be a slave, according to Republicans who think that's what free college is. So, I mean, it's just all these things are going to get passed, and it's going to be awesome. It's going to be a great time. The Puerto Ricans will be full-fledged, stated citizens. Everybody will be vacationing there, just like Hawaii. It'll be great.
We're going to consolidate the Dakotas. There's really no need for Kristi Noem to be governor of fucking anything. So we can consolidate the Dakotas. We can divide California into 4 or 5 separate blue bastions. We can just tip the scales. There's going to be 45 Supreme Court justices. And Philip, again, in his 70s, is going to be documenting all of this. Just in a state of absolute stress because he's going to be able to remember this was the conversation that triggered all of it.
This is the turning point.
And he was an active,
true.
You, sir, played an active role in it.
We never expected Josiah to become president, guys. We didn't think it would go that far.
Dude. Listen, Philip knows as much as he likes me. I feel like if I ever became president, he would be sufficiently nervous for what I would do in retaliation.
There would be gulags. Okay.
There, I didn't say that. I'm just saying there would be. I would be a bit of a
Hassan-style re-education camps. Okay.
Oh, you would. Hey, excuse me. That's Secretary of State Hassan Piker. Okay, no. Then I turn Econoboi against me. Econoboi would be my Secretary of, I don't know if the Treasury or Labor. I don't know. We're at this point in terms
Vice
of your
president, Josiah. Obviously, come on.
we gotta have you doing something with commerce and the economy and stuff like that. By the way, why would you want to be vice president? Most useless fucking job. Actually, can I see this real quick, Philip? Was there ever a consideration of giving the vice president, besides just presiding over the Senate, like an actual robust executive prerogative, or was it just, hey, you're going to be the administrative officer of the Senate, which they really no longer are, and that's it? Like, you're going to have a foot in both worlds and really no other executive responsibilities.
As far as I can recall, the biggest proposals on the table prior to the draft that we kind of got were like the models that we had in other states like Pennsylvania, where there was sort of an executive committee. Like, you had a chief executive, but there was some sort of committee underneath him that had some sort of shared power. And so there was kind of a question of whether or not you were going to have something like that, or if it was kind of going to be him, and then, he can appoint a cabinet, obviously. But then I don't recall any specific discussion, but I'm not familiar with all of this. So there might be somebody who really wanted them to have something like that. There is an interesting discussion actually in there's an essay that Frederick Douglass wrote on like threats to the American Republic, and one of the threats he thinks to the American Republic and the continuation of liberty is the existence of a vice president as an office, and that like hand that they have in presiding, that there's like he thinks it opens the door for this kind of like split executive. It's really interesting. He has a couple arguments about like parts of the Constitution that he thinks like
I'd love for you to send me that. That sounds interesting. Can you imagine? Because John Adams referred to it as the most, basically, that he was sent into premature retirement. It's the most useless job in the world. Can you imagine him reading that now and going, it's the biggest threat to democracy, my useless fucking job? That's funny. But listen, fellas, I really appreciate this. We got to do this again sometime. It's always fun to kind of wish cast and see again what we would change differently. And you know what? I'm going to predict this too. I think that I'm going to give it, let's say, by November. Let me put you like this. I think, Econoboi, if Trump wins in November, God forbid, I think Philip will actually come back and be like, guys, so about those institutional changes, I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of on board for it.
We'll see.
We got any big plans to stream during the convention, Josiah? You gotta iron that out. That'll be a good. I plan on. I'm thinking about. I've already got the week off scheduled when the election happens. It's like I always take a vacation during the presidential elections because I wouldn't be able to work. Like I told my boss, I was like, you don't want me working during that week because I'd fucking be useless. Wouldn't be able to focus on anything. And
Philip, he's an air traffic controller, by the way, just to let you know.
Yeah, okay. Neurosurgeon. No, but I would. No, but seriously, I was thinking about during like the week of the presidential election. I was like, man, should I just do like an MSNBC style, like 24/7 stream just until we know the results? Because, man, that's all I'm gonna be doing anyway, is just following the news. Like I barely even fucking showered the last time there was a presidential election. I was like, I need to eat. My wife's like,
down for
please
it,
eat. I'm
down for it. We give Philip on there because as Trump is leading in the polls, and I'm like, fuck it, let's abolish the Supreme Court, let's abolish the Senate. We just don't need this. He's gonna have to, fuck it all.
Pondering politics, 2024 presidential election results breakdown compilation. 2 hours of just like, I can't believe this, guys. That's told the thing. You.
Yeah, not the breakdown of the results, but the breakdown of pondering politics in real time, just like the slow erosion. But yeah, no, we will definitely put something. We'll definitely put something together. But yeah, guys, I really appreciate this. We'll do this again soon. Thanks, Philip, again, and I just ordered while we were talking a replacement for this, so don't worry. I won't have to be fucking with this the whole time.
You look very Italian.
It's a spicy meatball or whatever. I'm not really good with accents. I feel like that sounded like Count Dracula, so I don't know. Was that a good Italian? No,
it was. What it was offensive, Josiah.
To who? Italians?
Exactly, to Italians. What do you think? You can't offend the Italian group of people, I suppose?
I think that was a sterling impression of an Italian chef, and I think that they would be pleased with it. I think they'd be honored.
That's fair.
Really. So, all right. Well, listen, I'm going to let this go, and we'll do this again soon. I appreciate it. And chat, thank you. Thanks for showing up, and thanks for contributing. And again, can't wait to see Philip be radicalized into an institutional reformist and perhaps even a populist. I think it's coming. So
We'll see.
Yeah.